Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal Venerable, see playlist for other chapters and novels. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 681, The Dreamy Swampland. To the ethereal spirit sect, this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. How could the septuplets of ethereal spirit dare to be negligent at this moment? Although the dragon trapping rope was one of the ethereal spirit sect's trump cards, Eddie was still the #1 warrior in the central region. This worried them and made them uncertain towards the whole situation. Furthermore, the black mist emitted by Eddie was continuously corroding the dragon trapping rope. If Eddie would successfully destroy the dragon trapping rope, the ethereal spirit sect's plan would fall apart and everything that they had done would be in vain. And they could not afford any of that. After the septuplets of ethereal spirit formed the 7-in-1 array, their collective strength had increased considerably. The one leading them had actually already reached the late stage of the virtual tribulation realm. Then, as the 7-in-1 array could fuse the powers of the 7 of them, they believed that if they were to launch a sword attack, it would definitely take Eddie's life. Swoosh! The sword light of the person in the lead of the septuplets of ethereal spirit suddenly erupted and pierced into the black mist. Everyone looked at the black mist nervously. Because Eddie was trapped by the dragon trapping rope, he could not use his life vitality. Now, if the sword hit him, he would definitely not be able to block it. As Zen stared at the black fog, a sudden bad premonition arose in his heart. From the day he first stepped into the central region, he had already regarded Eddie as his opponent and the biggest obstacle in his path of cultivation. He did not believe that Eddie would be that easily dealt with. Compared to Zen, however, the others felt very confident. For example, Robin, the head of the She clan, believed that if he could help the ethereal spirit sect get rid of Eddie, the She clan would be famous not only in the central region, but throughout the whole world. Ding, 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 ding. Just as the septuplets of ethereal spirit combined their powers to launch a powerful attack, sounds of metal breaking were suddenly heard. Soon after, everyone saw several beams of light shooting out from the black fog. Plop, 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 plop. The light beams contained a great amount of power, and they instantly hit the chests of the 4 people of the septuplets of ethereal spirit. However, the light beams did not stop there. They all pierced through chests of the 4 people, causing blood to spurt from their chests and backs. The sudden attack created terrifying gaping holes in their chests, and after a few moments, the 4 people fell from the sky. It was only then that everyone was able to clearly see that the light beams were actually sword fragments. Not only was the sword attack of the septuplets of ethereal spirit unable to kill Eddie, it had shot back at them after shattering, instantly killing 4 of them. No, brother, impossible. As this was happening, everyone's expression began to change dramatically. The cries of the remaining 3 of the septuplets of ethereal spirit rang out loud and clear, adding to the despair of the people watching. The septuplets of ethereal spirit had shared the same food and the same bedroom all their lives, and because of that, they had reached a level of mutual understanding that was greater than siblings. They had made explorations in the central region for so many years without a single one of them dying. The sudden deaths of 4 people were something that they would not be able to deal with. As the black mist gradually dispersed, everyone saw that the dragon trapping rope that was originally binding Eddie's body was beginning to break. Then, the light of the dragon trapping rope slowly disappeared. At this moment, Eddie's body was emitting a violent aura, and his skin was starting to get covered with layers of scales. Forcing me into this state is far more annoying than I initially thought it would be. In order to return the favor, I will murder the entire ethereal spirit sect. Ha ha, Eddie roared as he laughed crazily. Then, his expression changed. The entire ethereal city seemed to be shrouded in his presence. Other than him, there seemed to be no other existence. Retreat, Zen shouted. Immediately, he wasted no time and rushed towards Margaret to catch hold of her. The life vitality within his body began to madly revolve while at the same time, his forceful energy started erupting. With both his life vitality and forceful energy working, he moved at a crazy speed. His premonition was indeed correct. Since Eddie had the confidence to establish his own divine kingdom, he definitely had methods to deal with the ethereal spirit sect. I'm going to kill you. The septuplets of ethereal spirit had lived and breathed as a single person. With the other 4 dead, the remaining 3 wouldn't be able to live on. Other than the remaining 3 of the septuplets of ethereal spirit, the other people had no urge to fight anymore. Facing Eddie in such a state was simply courting death. Because of that, Brent and Robin did not stop Zen when they saw him taking Margaret away. Both of them knew that she would be much safer with Zen than with them. On the other hand, Brent and Robin ran in 2 different directions. The remaining 3 of the septuplets of ethereal spirit tried their best to stall Eddie for them. Although they would not be able to beat Eddie, they were still warriors at the virtual tribulation realm and would be able to stall him for a while. Zen was all up in his head, thinking of ways to run away from Eddie. He had expected that Eddie would not be easily killed, but he did not expect him to be this strong. In the past, Zen was able to block 1 or 2 attacks from Eddie, and with his speed, he could run away from him. But now, at Eddie's current cultivation level, it seemed that Zen would be unable to block a single attack from him. With all these in his head, Zen rushed forward, and in just a short span of time, he was already out of the ethereal city. Outside ethereal city were boundless mountains, and going at one direction, he once again released the forceful energy within his body, transforming into a beam of light zooming through the air. With Zen's flying speed, he would only need 3 days to reach Cloudy City without the aid of a transmission array. But, would Eddie not chase after him? Zen was originally Eddie's target, and now, adding to that, he also had Margaret with him. This woman was also someone Eddie had to get. After taking care of the remaining of the septuplets of ethereal spirit, Eddie would definitely chase them and catch up. Sure enough, within just 5 minutes, Zen saw a black dot appear behind him. That small black dot was none other than Eddie. Although Zen's speed was incredibly fast, the speed of the black dot wasn't far from his. If Zen stopped using his forceful energy, the black dot would easily catch up to them. But Zen couldn't just use his forceful energy non-stop. This was a limitation of the body refiners that even Zen was unable to avoid it. When Zen had just entered the Sea God continent, he had been also chased by 3 ogre warlords, just like what was happening now, and had been almost caught up to in the end, the reason being that he was unable to replenish his forceful energy in time. Holy garbage, we're in trouble, Zen said aloud, his brows furrowed deeply. However, he didn't notice that Margaret was acting like a piece of wood, expressionlessly resting on his shoulder. Just as Zen was thinking about how to deal with the whole situation, Margaret suddenly said, "Zen, kill me." If he killed Margaret, then Zen wouldn't need to carry such a big person while running. His speed would significantly increase and the probability of him escaping Eddie would be better. If it was anyone else, Zen would just leave alone, believing that Eddie would not cause trouble for others. However, since Margaret possessed the purple power body, she was also someone that Eddie had to obtain. As he thought about it, Zen realized how hard of a decision he was being forced to make. "Kill you." Lavender, who was flying alongside Zen, laughed coldly. "Are you not afraid of death anymore?" Margaret's face revealed a determined look. "In the past, I was very afraid of death. But now I'm not afraid anymore." Today was indeed a sad day for Margaret. She suddenly felt that she was a fool in everyone's eyes. Although the members of the She clan treated her very well, no one trusted her, not even Brent, who she grew up with. With that, Margaret had become dejected like never before. As soon as she finished speaking, Lavender's spear suddenly appeared, and it was pointed to Margaret. Lavender really intended to kill her. The tip of the spear was only inches away from Margaret's forehead. In Lavender's eyes, only by killing her would Zen be able to run away with all his might and successfully evade Eddie. She had wanted to kill Margaret for a long time now. "Stop," Zen suddenly ordered, his voice devoid of emotion. "Zen, if she dies, we'll have a better chance of escaping." "Think about that," Lavender said, still aiming at Margaret's forehead. "I know," replied Zen, staring straight ahead. "Then why don't you let me kill her?" Lavender asked again. She felt it was unwise to drag a burden like Margaret, especially in this kind of situation. Zen took a deep breath, and forceful energy burst out of him once more, propelling him to run faster. After his speed suddenly increased, Zen said, "I know another way." After they passed through countless mountains outside Ethereal City, a plain appeared. It was shrouded in clouds and mist. This was the biggest swamp in the central region, the Dreamy Swampland. Chapter 682, Mud. There were countless fierce beasts lurking in the dreamy swampland, a place that until now, no one from the central region had been able to fully explore. When they had been up in the air, Eddie's eyes had locked firmly on Zen, who had found it extremely difficult to get rid of Eddie. But the dreamy swampland was complicated, which meant that Zen now had the chance to shake Eddie off. Zen walked swiftly towards the dreamy swampland. Eddie sneered as he saw what Zen was about to do. You want to enter the dreamy swampland? It's a good idea, Zen, but luck isn't on your side this time. Eddie took out a message rune and pinched it. The rune began to burn. Simon, a rat has entered the dreamy swampland. I've already killed the septuplets of ethereal spirit, and it won't be long before I take down the ethereal spirit sect. Tell Darius to retreat 300 miles. Bring your men here. Eddie was sure that Simon had been hiding in the dreamy swampland all these years. There was no one in the whole central region who knew the dreamy swampland better than Simon did. Zen had obviously made the wrong choice. Why would he choose to hide in the dreamy swampland of all places? It looked like it would become his grave today. Not long after, a flame rose up behind Eddie's ears. Simon had sent Eddie a message through his message rune. The voice chuckled as it reassured Eddie, to me, the dreamy swampland is like my backyard. Let me help you catch that rat. Simon was only marginally weaker than Eddie and they weren't affiliated with each other. Simon's ambition was to establish a sacred place and Eddie's dream was to establish his own divine kingdom. They cooperated with each other so that they could achieve their goals. Not for nothing were they the top martial artists in the central region. Despite everything, Eddie knew that they were only taking advantage of each other's skills for the time being. A fight between them was inevitable once they achieved their respective goals. Simon was most likely hiding a trump card that Eddie did not know about, but Eddie was confident that he could take down Simon. No matter what the future held, there was no conflict between them right now and their cooperation seemed perfectly beneficial to both of them. After all, their targets were shockingly similar and they were both intensely ambitious. The moment Zen entered the dreamy swampland, he immediately lowered his altitude. He was now practically skimming the ground as he flew. The dreamy swampland had an extremely complex terrain. There were shallow depressions all around, the water in many of which looked clear from afar, but in reality contained deadly poison. A sip of this water could kill even the most powerful of all creatures. Zen flew close to the ground, trying his best to hide his own scent. In order to conceal any life vitality and aura, Zen even made sure that lavender stayed inside his body in the form of a speck of red light. He slowed down considerably because of this. Zen could not sense Eddie's scent once he had entered the dreamy swampland. It was possible that Eddie had also hidden his scent. And right now, Zen and Eddie were both unable to tell each other's locations, something that was exactly what Zen wanted. Since the dreamy swampland was vast and complicated, Zen could distance himself from Eddie and cautiously leave the swampland as long as he hid his scent and moved forward slowly. If he did this, it wouldn't be too difficult for him to get rid of Eddie. It's useless. You won't be able to leave, Margaret suddenly piped up. Zen clapped a hand to her mouth just as she finished speaking, glaring at her. Shut up. Do you have a death wish? He hissed. She was now unable to speak as her nose and mouth were covered tightly by Zen's hand. Her brown eyes, enlarged by the suddenness of Zen's action, stared coldly at Zen, as if she didn't know what fear was. Zen was startled as he felt a formidable power looming over them. He approached a quagmire, as silently as he could, while pulling Margaret along, his hand still on her mouth. His vigilance couldn't prevent him from becoming completely submerged in the quagmire. Zen knew that Eddie had an acute sense of perception, so he didn't dare use his life vitality to shield his body. He was afraid that if he did, Eddie would sense the waves of his life vitality and detect him in half a breath. So he allowed himself and Margaret to be gulped down by the quagmire. Margaret frowned. She was a stickler for cleanliness, but right now, as she was forbidden to use the life vitality, the thought of her body being covered with black mud made her uncomfortable and angry. She twisted in Zen's arms and began to create a ruckus. You're not even afraid of death. Why are you afraid of becoming dirty? Zen sneered, his voice low. Margaret stopped resisting at Zen's question. Taking this opportunity, Zen dragged her further down into the bottom of the mire. Soon after, the two of them were completely wrapped in mud and were at the bottom of the quagmire. As soon as he entered the quagmire, Zen had felt a strand of perception sweep across the area he was in, and then slowly leave. It was obvious that it had been Eddie's perception. The two of them lay down quietly at the bottom of the quagmire, not daring to move a muscle. A few minutes later, Zen took Margaret's arm and crawled out. But he didn't dare make a sound, making sure to take care as they moved to the edge of the quagmire. Margaret, who had originally been dressed in white, had become unrecognizable. Without the protection of her life vitality, all of her was now drenched in mud. She had never been so dirty in her whole life. The black mud made her extremely uncomfortable, as if a bunch of reptiles were crawling all over her body. All she wanted right now was a place to wash up. Before Margaret could speak, she heard Zen warn her, "Don't move. Don't activate your life vitality." She followed Zen's gaze and saw a small black snake appear in the grass beside her. The little snake's entire body was jet black, and because its skin was too smooth, it flickered with a faint luster. Black feather snake. Margaret recognized the snake at once, thanks to the feather-like crest on its head. It wasn't because Margaret was knowledgeable that she was able to instantly recognize it, but because the black feather snake was too famous. The black feather snake was the most famous poisonous creature in the central region. The poison from this snake was extremely expensive, and was considered a rare poison in the world, making it valuable. No matter how powerful a martial artist was, the person would die within seconds of this snake biting him or her. Its high level of toxicity meant it could take people's lives in an instant. And because of this, many martial artists would die every year in their attempt to catch the black feather snake. The moment Margaret saw the black feather snake, her first instinct was to employ her life vitality to deal with it. But Zen stopped her. The snake hissed. It seemed to have sensed that they had discovered it, and it suddenly shot out of the grass, approaching Margaret swiftly and trying to bite her. Zen threw out his hand to block the snake from hurting Margaret, and it latched onto his arm, biting into it. The sight of the black feather snake biting Zen's arm made Margaret want to scream. But before she could do anything, Zen had already covered her mouth with his other hand. He had expected her to shriek even before she had started. Margaret looked at the snake, terrified. It bit you," she said, shocked. Zen reached out and grabbed the black feather snake. With a casual swipe, he tore the snake into several pieces and threw it into the grass. "I'm fine," he told Margaret easily. Margaret looked at Zen like she was looking at a monster. She had heard all sorts of inconceivable things that had happened to Zen. But how could he possibly be fine given that this black feather snake's poison was so strong? "Follow me," Zen said, pushing aside the grass and gesturing to Margaret to follow him. She stared at Zen's back, lost in thought. She knew that Zen had reached out only because he wanted to stop her from activating her life vitality, and he hadn't hesitated to extend his hand even though he knew that the snake would bite him. A jumble of emotions wreaked havoc within her. After pondering about it for a while, Margaret took a step forward and followed Zen. But since she was covered in a layer of mud, she felt uncomfortable all over. She had always been entitled to abundant resources for cultivation. Besides, she was also a heaven-level talent. With exceptional talent, she had never gone out to gain experience in dangerous places, yet she had already stepped into the internal elixir realm. She couldn't imagine how difficult it was for martial artists to survive in this cruel world. She also couldn't understand martial artists who would risk their lives just for a low-grade spiritual weapon, or those who endured endless trials and tribulations for several years just to get their hands on one small pill. She might have heard other warriors talk about how many hardships they had faced since they had become cultivators. But she had never experienced those hardships. From a certain point of view, this was her first time going out to gain experience. Zen walked slowly in the dreamy swampland, Margaret closely following him. They were fearful of being detected if they utilized their life vitality, because of which they didn't dare fly. As they stumbled through the swamp, her eyes suddenly lit up as she saw a small clear pond, since this meant that she could clean up in the water. She caught up and patted Zen on the shoulder, saying, "I want to take a bath." Zen looked at Margaret, amused, and then he looked at the clear, small pond beside him. He plucked a plant and threw it into the pond. Hiss! The moment the plant touched the water, it hissed and sizzled and started to turn black, emitting a faint smoke. It was obvious that the clear water in the pond contained a highly toxic poison. "Do you still want to take a bath?" Zen asked with a smile. Chapter 683, Hunt and Escape. The entirety of the dreamy swampland was enveloped in a faint mist. Evidently, this fog was different from the fog in the dark nether cave. The fog of the latter had been arranged using a magical array. If one failed to find the array plate, they would be stuck in the fog and never be able to leave. The fog of the dreamy swampland, on the other hand, could be considered a bit troublesome for ordinary people as well as to the martial art cultivators with low cultivation bases. For martial cultivators at Zen's level, more attention to the complicated environment and the vicious beasts needed to be paid. Margaret's eyes widened in disbelief when she saw the poisonous water of the pond. She did not have a strong body like Zen to resist the poison. She felt that if she were to get in the water, her entire body would be corroded by it until not even her ashes remained. But I want to take a bath. Margaret couldn't stand her body in its current state, filthy and dirty. Bear with it, Zen said, shaking his head. He shoved aside the bushes and continued to move forward. The direction he was heading in was the one Eddie had scanned through his senses. Normally, Zen would be moving away from Eddie, in the exact opposite path. Instead, he was following him. They hadn't yet entered deep into the dreamy swampland. Eddie was already in there, and as long as Zen got out of the dreamy swampland, he might escape from his enemy successfully. He was clever enough to do the opposite. As per his judgment, Eddie had released his senses on purpose just to mislead Zen and make him think that he had entered deep into the dreamy swampland. When Eddie got the opportunity, he would attack him. If things went south, Zen would be in great danger. As Zen advanced ahead, he mulled over a plan to handle the upcoming situation. Suddenly, the expression on his face changed as he quickly bent down and pulled Margaret into the nearby bushes. In midair, a figure turned back into the fog, moving at lightning speed as it shot to the outskirts of the dreamy swampland. I guessed right, Zen muttered, his eyes flashing with excitement. If he had just left the dreamy swampland, Eddie would have caught him. Eddie flew at full speed as he rushed out of the swampland. The thick fog could block anyone's senses and even he couldn't release his own for too far. They only stretched to a small area around him. What was most antagonizing was that even though the dreamy swampland looked extremely desolate, there were countless creatures lurking within. If Zen were to hide inside, Eddie would not be able to discern him. For that reason, Eddie had to initially give Zen the wrong impression that he had entered deep into the swamp. Very quickly afterward, he would turn back from his way and rush out of the swampland with the speed of a shooting star. If Zen's plan had been to escape Eddie, he would have chosen to exit the dreamy swampland as soon as possible. Then, as Zen turned back, Eddie was very likely to catch him off guard. That brat would not be able to escape from Eddie's hunt. Now he had to track Zen down soon. However, Eddie did not find Zen at all as he left the dreamy swampland. He landed in an open area outside the swampland where he had placed a long and thin rod. On top of it was a purple crystal shining with the power of life vitality. It was a simple picture slab. Eddie had set it up before entering the dreamy swampland. If Zen left the place, his picture slab would record his movements. Eddie searched for a while but did not find Zen's figure in the records of the picture slab. His mouth twisted into a sinister smile as he muttered, "What a cunning boy. He's still hiding in there." At the moment, Eddie was in no hurry to find Zen. He was patiently waiting for Simon to come to help him. Simon had been lurking in the dreamy swampland for so many years that no one in the central region knew this place better than him. Eddie had already kindled a message rune to inform Simon about where he was. He did not have to wait long before dozens of beams appeared in the distance, hurtling directly toward him. The source of the beams seemed to move fast. It was undoubtedly Simon. As Simon landed beside Eddie, he merely nodded in greeting, while the other 20 people with him cupped their hands. They addressed Eddie respectfully, saying, "Greetings, Lord." Eddie nodded in reply before he turned to Simon. "Simon, Zen brought that woman from the Shi family into the dreamy swampland. Do you have any ideas to help me find him out?" A confident smile appeared on Simon's face. "I am very familiar with every area of this dreamy swampland," he murmured, pride seeping into his voice. "As long as the boy is still in the dreamy swampland, I will find him sooner or later. Eddie, just follow me." He then turned to the virtual Tribulation Realm warriors with him, giving them instructions. "You will search different areas according to my orders. The dreamy swampland is huge. Finding a person within it seems as difficult as looking for a needle in a haystack. But in fact, it would not be so arduous to find him. Each area has different kinds of beasts. Once Zen passes through them, he will certainly disturb those living there. And once he fights them, I will be able to sense his location." Hearing Simon's arrogant tone, Eddie frowned. He had once demanded Simon to call him Lord, but Simon, after agreeing to it ever so casually, still called Eddie by his name. Apparently, he still didn't agree to Eddie's status as the Divine Kingdom's ruler. They were willing to cooperate with each other in the Divine Kingdom's grand plans because they had the same goal. However, since both were life and death realm masters, neither was willing to submit to the other. Well, I will bear with you until my lustful demon array succeeds. If you still don't submit to me at the time, I won't show you any mercy, Eddie thought to himself. Eddie was not the only person to bear a grudge against his cooperator. There was no doubt that Simon had made valuable contributions to the development of the heavenly evil divine kingdom, but he would never agree to acknowledge Eddie as the only ruler of the divine kingdom. Certainly, he had his own reasons for joining on in this hunt for Zen. According to Simon, Zen and Margaret, both must be killed at this place. He didn't want Margaret to fall into Eddie's hands, for once Eddie succeeded in his lustful demon array, Simon's fate wouldn't be so hard to imagine. Perhaps the best course of action for Simon would be to completely submit to Eddie, but once Eddie grew even stronger and ruthless in the martial arts, Simon would very likely be the first person to be dead meat. Both of them were hatching plots of their own. But when they worked together, they were indeed the greatest force in the entirety of Central Region. Under Simon's instructions, they all entered the dreamy swampland, communicating with each other using message runes. Eddie had never entered the deepest parts of this broad swamp. Perhaps, from ancient times until now, Simon was the only person who had ever lived here, which was why he was so familiar with every inch of the dreamy swampland. After Simon separated from the others and entered the swampland, his body started emitting a kind of dark green poisonous fog. The fog quickly spread, merging with the fog of the swampland while he kept floating in the air. His eyes widened with concentration as if he was trying hard to communicate with someone or something. Zen and Margaret were moving quite slowly and cautiously in the swampland. They had only covered less than 10 miles in quite a long while. It was difficult to walk in the swampland when the entire place was covered with mud and dirty water. Margaret frowned along the way as she lifted her dress with her hands. With every step she took, her lips curled with disgust and reluctance, and as she watched her sleeves sink into the pitch-black mud, she could not help but feel overwhelmed with repulsion. Zen had of course noticed her unpleasant expressions, but he could not afford to attend to this proud young lady under such urgent circumstances. Humans could vary a lot in their personalities. Lavender's status was 1,000 times higher than this young lady of the Shi family. She was considered a top-level cultivator even in the upper world. It could be said that she was born noble, meant to stand at the highest level of lives and look down on all living beings of the lower world. However, after Lavender realized the situation she was in, she quickly acknowledged Zen as her master. She was so decisive in her choices that she placed all her hopes on Zen almost without hesitation. Margaret, on the other hand, seemed not to understand the situation around her. After they crossed over a patch of grass, a vast stretch of lagoon appeared in front of them. The lagoon was not deep. The water in it would only reach their waists, but since they didn't dare use their life vitality to fly across it, they would only be able to slowly wade through the water. "There's no poison in the water, right?" Margaret asked, turning to Zen. Zen stepped into the lagoon first. "No," he replied flatly. Margaret's face broke into a small smile. At last she could wash the dirt off her body and clothes. They slowly made their way through the lagoon. Margaret used the water to wash the mud off her body. Her white clothes clung to her body as they got wet, outlining her slim waist and the graceful lines of her figure. Just as Margaret was concentrating on washing her body, a few ripples broke the surface of the water not far away from them. They silently raced through the quiet water surface, approaching Zen and Margaret. Chapter 684, Hiding. Beneath the ripples lurked many gray-scaled crocodiles. They were called scaled orange-teeth crocodile. Their skin could be used to construct spiritual weapons. However, not a lot of warriors were willing to hunt and kill them. The reason behind it was that the orange-teeth crocodiles were too ferocious and their defensive power was immense. Even the warriors at the internal elixir realm found it hard to kill them. Moreover, the reward for killing those creatures was only the skin that they had. That wasn't much for the warriors, so risking their lives couldn't have been worth it. At that moment, over 100 orange-teeth crocodiles stealthily approached Zen. To avoid getting discovered, he withdrew his life vitality and didn't even dare reveal his perception. That way, he wasn't able to take notice of the crocodiles as well. Both Zen and Margaret moved toward the flowing water, but the faint ripples got closer to them by the minute. Crash! An orange-teeth crocodile emerged from the water and went to Margaret's direction, opening its large mouth in an attempt to bite her. Those creatures were brilliant in camouflaging. If one didn't pay close attention, he could mistake it for a rotten wood floating on the water. What was worse was they could move very fast. Hearing the sudden splashing in the water from behind her, Margaret turned around and was welcomed by an enormous crocodile mouth. She stopped dead in her tracks. The crocodile near her had 2 rows of sharp, orange teeth that could leave marks even on an iron. Normally, the ordinary internal elixir realm warriors weren't afraid of the orange-teeth crocodiles. However, Margaret was an exception as she didn't have any experience in training. She had no idea how to deal with this particular creature should she encounter one. Suddenly, Zen's figure appeared, lightly tapping on the surface of the water. Using his strength, he jumped over and directly stomped on the crocodile's lower jaw. The crocodile quickly moved its upper jaw to try to bite into Zen's leg. With no hesitation, Zen punched the crocodile in its upper jaw. Bam! The forceful punch Zen threw tore the crocodile's mouth in an instant. Bright red blood spurted out and mixed right into the waters. Suffering from significant pain, the orange-teeth crocodile squirmed, causing waves of water everywhere. Ah! Margaret screamed. 6 orange-teeth crocodiles appeared right beside her. Those creatures all seemed to agree that Margaret could make a sumptuous meal. Knitting his eyebrows, Zen couldn't help but be pissed about the situation. Those crocodiles didn't scare Zen at all. If they tried to eat him up as he just stood there, they couldn't swallow him whole. However, killing all 6 of them at the same time would take some strategizing. If he employed his life vitality, he could instantly kill the crocodiles, but he was also worried that Eddie might sense his life vitality waves then. In addition, fighting against these creatures could cause loud noises. The dreamy swampland was as tranquil as a cemetery. Even the slightest sound could spread into a distance. Oh, no, we are probably in trouble. As Zen floated past, the life vitality within his body began to revolve slowly. Dragging Margaret, who was very scared, Zen sprinted forward on the surface of the water. Naturally, the orange-teeth crocodiles weren't able to fly, so they weren't able to catch up with Zen and Margaret. When they reached the edge of the lagoon, Zen quickly withdrew his life vitality and then pushed Margaret to the side and said, "Leave this place right now." At the same time, Simon, who was quietly floating in the air, smiled slyly and then said, "Very good. I've found you. Now Zen should be near the crocodile pond in the southeast region. Be careful of the crocodiles in the water." Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Upon hearing Simon's words, several warriors at the virtual tribulation realm in the air immediately turned into a few beams of light and flew towards the southeast. They did not have any qualms as Zen and Margaret did, so they moved at great speed without trouble. With his growing intentions of killing both Zen and Margaret, Simon also dashed forward to the southeast pretty quickly. His goal at that time was to rush up to Zen earlier than others, especially Eddie. In less than 5 minutes, the virtual tribulation realm warriors had already arrived at the lagoon where Zen and Margaret had just passed by. They found a dead orange-teeth crocodile floating on the water with its mouth split open. Go after Zen. He might have just passed by this place. Killing Zen would be your greatest achievement and you shall be magnanimously rewarded by the Lord. There were reasons why those independent warriors were so determined to follow and obey Eddie. One of the main reasons was the probability that Eddie's rewards were very generous, and when they all teamed up, there was at least the sense of belonging. No matter what happened, the divine kingdom could help them settle it. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The several light beams scattered in several directions, searching the crevices of the place inch by inch for Zen. At that time, Zen and Margaret had already continued to advance deeper into the dreamy swampland. Suddenly, Zen felt waves of life vitality behind him. Then, a faint light flashed through the fog. "Get down," Zen shouted at Margaret, pulling her to hide in the grass. The beam of light was moving at an extremely high speed, and it swept past Zen's head in just a blink of an eye. He is a virtual tribulation realm warrior, Zen thought. He guessed that Eddie had sent his men to hunt him down, which meant that there were more warriors in the dreamy swampland at that moment. In order to track him down, Eddie even stopped attacking the ethereal spirit sect. Zen thought that Eddie indeed took him as a very powerful enemy. As Zen and Margaret lurked in the grass, the virtual tribulation realm warrior didn't take notice of them. Zen had planned to leave with Margaret after the warrior had already gone away. Suddenly, a small spider quietly crawled along the grass towards Margaret. A ghost face could be seen on the spider's back. Encountering the ghost-faced spiders on the cloud road before, Zen knew that they weren't considered as threatening monsters. However, as the ghost-faced spider sprung up, it directly jumped onto Margaret's arm. Sensing that there was something on her arm, she raised it to look and was immediately shocked. Although she perfectly knew that she should not make any movements at that time, she was still unable to keep herself from letting out a sharp cry. Ah! Zen's expression changed as he covered Margaret's mouth. The ghost-faced spider was crushed under Zen's palm as he crushed it hard. The two of them tried to stay still in the grass. In all honesty, Zen wasn't threatened by the virtual Tribulation Realm warrior. But he believed that when he took any action, his location could be revealed to the others, and Eddie could reach him sooner than later. The virtual Tribulation Realm warrior left in rapid speed. He had already traveled over a mile after he flew past Zen's head and when Margaret cried. A woman's shriek took him by surprise. A strange expression appeared on the virtual Tribulation Realm warrior's face. After he thought for a moment while floating in the air, he changed his direction and flew back to where Zen and Margaret were. The warrior thought that the voice he was hearing was particularly sharp, resembling a woman's scream. A sound like that could easily ring throughout the swamp. The sound didn't last very long, so it made the warrior feel suspicious. It confused him whether it was a woman's voice or it was a bird's. Carefully, he decided to search around the area one more time. The virtual Tribulation Realm warrior slowly floated in the air. He used his perception to check the ground bit by bit. After he rigorously searched through the swamp, he decided to check the grass again. At that time, he was getting closer and closer to Zen. As Zen stared at the approaching warrior floating in the air, he pressed Margaret firmly into him. His calm eyes showed a trace of pressure. If the warrior continued to be that meticulous, they could surely be discovered by him. I hope you're lucky enough to fail to discover me here. Otherwise, you will be in great trouble, Zen thought. If the virtual Tribulation Realm warrior discovered Zen, he had no other plans but to kill him. The warrior didn't have the slightest idea that approaching Zen meant approaching his death. In his eyes, Zen was only at the early stage of the virtual Tribulation Realm, staying together with Margaret, who was just an early stage internal elixir realm warrior. In that situation, the virtual Tribulation Realm warrior believed that dealing with them both was a breeze. If he could catch Zen, it could be regarded as his most considerable contribution. Just like the sect, there was also competition among the Divine Kingdom's warriors. Being able to stand out among the other virtual Tribulation Realm warriors gave more benefits, especially when Eddie's Divine Kingdom became more powerful and influential. 500 feet, 300 feet, 200 feet, 100 feet. The muscles all over Zen's body tightened. At that specific distance, he didn't intend to use his life vitality. He knew that he could take down the enemy at once using his forceful energy. Chapter 685, The Underground Palace. The virtual Tribulation Realm warrior was only 10 feet away. However, in the split second that it took him to discover Zen with his perception, the latter's body was already erupting with forceful energy. Whoosh! The warrior did not even have a chance to react as Zen shot towards him with unbelievable speed and appeared right in front of him. He had wanted to ask the man in front of him if he was Zen. Everything had happened so fast that he was not really sure of what was going on. However, Zen did not give him the luxury of a reply. Bang! He felt a split second of intense pain as Zen's fist landed on his chest. The punch immediately deflated his chest and the warrior immediately slumped onto the grass, dead. Zen's moves were precise, meticulous, but also powerful. He was able to defeat his opponent with one blow. The sight shocked Margaret to the core. She was also a warrior and her cultivation level was by no means low, but the skills and strength Zen had just demonstrated left her slack-jawed. Margaret was no stranger to martial artist fights. Competitions among warriors from ethereal cities' families were held every year and, as the young miss of the Shi clan, a seat was always reserved for her in the stands. Her sharp eyes and reputation for predicting the winners with 80% accuracy were undisputed. But now, after seeing what Zen just did, the fights she witnessed back in the arena seemed no more than child's play. Margaret would have never expected someone who had just reached the virtual Tribulation Realm like Zen to be able to decimate a warrior at the middle stage of the same realm so easily. Nonetheless, Zen had no regard for Margaret's thoughts. He flew down and forcefully grabbed her by the arm. Let's go. Zen no longer hid his life vitality. He let it combine with his forceful energy as it erupted from his body and transformed himself into a streak of light that shot across the dreamy swampland. His judgment had been correct. Simon and the other warriors at the virtual Tribulation Realm were able to pinpoint his location the moment he killed that orange-teethed crocodile. He was able to cleanly kill one of them, but it was no use. Simon knew where he was and he was coming. Although Simon had instructed Eddie to scout the area first, the instructions were quickly thrown out the window the moment Zen made his presence known. Lavender's light flashed beside Zen. There was no longer a need for her to hide now that Zen had already exposed his location. She gave Margaret a cold, resentful look. Like I said, this girl is a nuisance. It's best if we just kill her now. If it wasn't for Margaret screaming, the virtual Tribulation Realm warrior would have never found Zen. Given enough time, they would have soon given up and left the area. However, things didn't turn out to their favor, and Eddie was once again hot on their tail along with other virtual Tribulation Realm warriors. A thick, white fog impaired everyone's visibility, but the fluctuations of each other's breath and life vitality were enough to pinpoint their rough locations. Zen was silent and focused on circulating his life vitality instead. As he traveled, the swampland scenery around him rapidly changed. When he had first entered the dreamy swampland, everything was emerald and lively. After venturing deeper, the plants around him were now mostly dark brown instead of green, and the environment was deathly still. As he was running, Zen could feel the life vitality fluctuations that followed him increase in intensity. From all the warriors that followed him, he could pinpoint two extremely strong and intense life vitality fluctuations. One is surely Eddie, but who's the other one? If he can travel as fast as Eddie, then perhaps he's also a life and death realm master. This was definitely not good news. Due to the fact that he couldn't use his forceful energy for prolonged periods of time, the gap between him and his pursuers gradually shortened until there was only 10 miles of distance between them. Ho ho, Zen, stop wasting your energy, you can't run away from me. An amused voice called out from behind him. Zen ignored him. There was no way he was going to respond to Eddie during such a high-speed chase. He pushed on and continued forward even if he himself was not very optimistic about the current situation. However, in that moment of helplessness, a strange voice spoke in his head, "Brat. Run to the right." Zen's eyes flashed and he immediately sent a message through his life vitality, "Who are you?" "Who am I? Ho ho," the person replied, not really giving him a straight answer. The voice message had been transmitted through life vitality by one of the two strong fluctuations behind him. Zen had no idea where Eddie was due to the thick, dense fog, but he was sure that the voice did not come from him. Who on earth was that? Why did he give me such advice? His voice also sounds familiar, he wondered briefly. He was someone with an extremely good memory and he could swear he already heard this voice 2 years ago. The only problem was that he was currently caught up in an extremely dangerous situation and could not really focus on remembering who the voice belonged to. "Why are you helping me?" Zen asked. "Help you? I'm not helping you. I just don't want the girl with you to fall into Eddie's hands," the voice answered with a laugh. Zen let out a cold smile. Looks like there are still other people who do not want to see Eddie become stronger. He was very hesitant to follow the strange voice's instructions. If it turned out to be a trap, he wasn't too hopeful that he'd be able to find a way out. "You're right," the voice spoke. "I don't want Eddie to become too strong and I'm sure you don't want that either. The easiest way to stop him is to kill the girl. What do you think? If I kill her, you will be satisfied, but I will be in danger. Is that right, Poison King Simon Wu?" Zen remembered now who the voice belonged to. It was Simon Wu, also known as Poison King, who he met back in the Wheel of Fortune. Simon was the one who dispelled the curse on the Holy Maiden of the Divine Kingdom. Now that he knew who he was talking to, Zen now had more confidence in believing Simon's words. As Zen was now being chased down by Simon and Eddie together, he would definitely die, so it was all completely unnecessary for Simon to help Zen. It seemed that the Poison King had joined forces with Eddie, but it did not seem like the two were exactly on friendly terms. Masters like them were quite selfish and did not like to share their benefits with other people. Two tigers couldn't live on the same mountain, after all. Most warriors wanted to climb to the top of the world. It was impossible for someone like Simon to submit to Eddie, and Eddie would never be able to tolerate Simon. Despite teaming up, there was unresolved and irreconcilable conflict that existed between the two of them. If Eddie got Margaret, he'd successfully manage a breakthrough and Simon would suffer bitterly. To the right, Zen immediately followed and turned to the right. "What now?" he asked through his life vitality. "There's an underground palace 10 miles ahead," Simon answered. "I can't guarantee that you'll be able to get rid of Eddie once you enter, but it should at least buy you some time." Beneath the dreamy swampland was a large underground palace that nobody but Simon knew about. It was an extremely dangerous place devoid of any treasures or opportunities. Simon had explored it twice but came up with nothing and almost died. "The underground palace will also take both of your lives," Simon muttered coldly in his mind. His best choice was to lead Zen into this underground palace and leave him there to die. Chapter 686, Flames of Fury. On this dreamy swampland, everyone got their own schemes. Zen wanted to take Margaret away and escape, while Eddie wanted to kill Zen and seize Margaret. Simon, on the other hand, wanted Margaret to die, and as for Zen, he didn't really care how he would end. If he died, Simon wouldn't benefit from it at all. All of Zen's possessions would be taken by Eddie, so to him, it didn't matter if Zen died or not. With his current speed, Zen would be able to close out the 10-mile distance in an instant. And truly, soon enough, Zen was able to see a large cave below them. This cave was surrounded by moss and ferns. Because of the lush vegetation around it, there was almost no light that could come into the cave, and so all they could see was a dark hole, which was the entrance of the cave, and nothing else. Without hesitation, Zen once again carried Margaret and entered the cave. When Eddie suddenly could not sense Zen's life vitality, a puzzled look appeared on his face. Simon sneered in secret, but he pretended that he was surprised by Zen's sudden disappearance. In no time, they reached above the cave. "This brat actually entered this underground palace," Simon said in a feigned surprised tone. Upon hearing this, Eddie's eyes narrowed. He turned to Simon in confusion and asked, "How did this kid know that there is an underground palace here?" Simon shook his head and replied, "This underground palace is very dangerous. I don't know how he knew about it. Maybe he knew that he couldn't escape from you, and so when he found out that there happened to be an underground palace here, he just entered it without much thought." After hearing what Simon had to say, Eddie gave him a suspicious glance. For so long, Zen had been going at one certain direction, but suddenly, he turned around and somehow knew of this underground palace, which he then entered. This didn't really sit well with Eddie. To be fair, he was a very skeptical man in the first place. Aside from doubting what Simon was telling him, he was also thinking whether Simon had told Zen about the underground palace in advance. As much as he wanted to confront Simon about it, he did not have any kind of evidence to prove his accusation. Moreover, it was unwise for him to argue with Simon right now, so he just nodded and said, "Even if he entered the underground palace, he won't be able to escape." At that moment, the warriors at the virtual tribulation realm caught up with them. Eddie glanced over and after a while he said, "Two are missing from the group. What happened to them?" Indeed, there were 2 people missing from the group of martial artists at virtual tribulation realm. Upon being asked where the 2 were, one of them said, one was killed by Zen, while the other one accidentally entered the lair of a water dragon and was devoured by it. The dreamy swampland was home to some extremely powerful and vicious beasts. As everyone went deeper and deeper into those beasts' territory, the beasts that they would encounter would only be stronger and fiercer than what they had seen before. "Water dragon," Eddie said, showing a lot of interest. "I'll take care of that later," he muttered to himself, smiling maliciously. "But first, I'll go into the underground palace and take Zen's life." And with that proclamation, Eddie took the lead and entered the underground palace. Simon and the other virtual tribulation realm martial artists followed closely behind. Since there was no light in the underground palace, Zen had to constantly rely on his senses other than the sight in order to progress through it. Perhaps this underground palace was built by some ancient sect. The road was meandering and spiraling, and it was like a huge maze. Zen knew Simon was not the kind of person who would help him out of goodwill. But as he seemed to have no way to get rid of Eddie, he had no choice but to follow his advice. There were countless paths in this complicated underground palace, and almost every route had 3 or 4 diversions. Zen did not know whether there were dangers ahead, the only thing he could do was to brave it out and charge ahead. After all, the more diversions there were, the less possible it would be for Eddie to come and find him. Thinking about this, Zen's face darkened, and his heart sank to the bottom of his stomach. He had gone through many hardships and was finally able to return from the Sea God continent. But things didn't look good for him back here, and now he was being pursued by Eddie and his group who were determined to kill him. His morale was down. It was at this moment that Margaret started to pester him once again. "It's so dark here," she started, the disgust in her voice evident. "I don't like it." Unexpectedly, Lavender did not taunt Margaret for her complaint. Instead, in the darkness, she calmly stared at Margaret, scoffing at her peevishness in her heart. Zen didn't say anything either and just kept traveling through the underground palace. He fled in any path he could take without really thinking about what could be ahead of him. "Could you find a way out? I don't want to stay here any longer," Margaret said once again. In her head, Lavender couldn't help but sneer as she was already feeling Zen's fury seething inside him. Lavender was very observant and intelligent, and so she knew whenever Zen was already extremely agitated. And at this moment, he really was. However, the idiotic young lady of the Shi clan kept on nagging and was as irritating as a fly. If this continued, Zen would surely lose his patience sooner or later. You know what? It would be best if Zen would end up killing this woman in a fit of rage, Lavender brooded resentfully. Get me out of here. Zen. When she saw that Zen wasn't going to say anything, Margaret's childlike temper worsened. She had completely forgotten that the reason Zen was being chased all the way to the underground palace was entirely because of her. Boom! Zen suddenly threw Margaret to the ground, with a force so strong that Margaret's supple body then hit the ground. As Margaret was at the primary level of the internal elixir realm, the impact of her fall wasn't enough to injure her. However, this unprecedented act of violence from Zen made Margaret dumbstruck. When she finally came back to her senses a few moments later, she suddenly screamed, "What are you doing?" Pa! Just before Margaret could finish what she was trying to say, Zen had already planted a slap across her face. Everyone knew that Zen was a man of powerful strength. If he had concentrated his full strength on the slap, he would be able to smash Margaret's head into pieces. However, Zen was able to control his strength, but the slap had still left a clear hand mark on her face. If it hadn't been for you, do you think I would ever have come here? Zen said, shaking. There were very few people who could anger him. Other than Eddie, who was his sworn enemy, Zen was rarely genuinely upset by anyone. Actually, the predicament they were in today wasn't something unconquerable to Zen. Throughout the years, he had already experienced many other life or death crises that were 10 times more troublesome than this. He knew there was still a gap between his and Eddie's strength, but in a fight between warriors, no one could be 100% sure as to who would be the winner. But if he were to go all out to fight Eddie, he might have a chance to defeat him. But somehow, Zen's flames of fury were successfully ignited by this foolish woman. It seemed like it was her talent to annoy and push people to their limits. Margaret slowly caressed her throbbing cheek and glared at Zen, saying, "You, how dare you hit me?" Back in the Shi clan's castle, Zen had only used his malicious aura to suppress Margaret, but he didn't actually hit her. Ever since you were a little kid, you have never been beaten by anyone, right? Zen blurted out before Margaret could continue her rant. Yes, no one has ever dared to hit me in my entire life. Margaret shouted, as she began hysterically crying. Pa! Just as Margaret finished speaking, Zen slapped her again. With that slap, Margaret's beautiful hair became undone. She became a mess. Under the dim light in the cave, she glared at Zen with her brown eyes. She gritted her teeth and said, "Zen, I'll fight you to the death." Her voice was shaking, but determination was obvious in her eyes. She stood up. Slowly but surely, she took on a stance that was ready to fight. "Let me see how you fight me." Zen suddenly rushed forward. He grabbed Margaret's neck with one hand and pushed her against the wall, causing a loud bang. Lightly, he pointed his fingers towards her underbelly, sending a stream of life vitality into her body. Her cultivation level was far lower than Zen's. After Zen's life vitality was injected into her underbelly, it immediately disturbed Margaret's life vitality and stopped it from working. Zen then flipped his hand and grabbed the collar of her clothes. He lightly pinched it and ripped her white dress off, tearing it into pieces. "What are you trying to do?" Margaret's eyes were wide open. She couldn't believe what Zen was doing to her. Gash! Another ripping sound was heard. "What am I doing? I'm going to take away your virginity energy." Zen sneered. He stretched out his hand and the sounds of clothes being ripped filled the cave. In an instant, all of Margaret's clothes were ripped, and she was stark naked. Margaret had never been with any man before. She was greatly astounded, seeing Zen savagely strip all her clothes off. Her body was completely naked now, and all the blood in her body surged to her head. Her face was completely red, half because of rage and half because of embarrassment. "Zen, you're no different from a wild beast," Margaret screamed. But Zen had already turned a deaf ear to Margaret. He knew her struggle would be completely futile, as she was weaker than him in the first place, as a cultivator merely at the primary level of the internal elixir realm. The truth was, even when Zen was still a nature creature, he had a high chance of defeating her. Moreover, now her life vitality had been sealed by Zen, and she wouldn't have the strength to resist. Soon after, Zen held onto Margaret's shoulder and pushed her to the ground. The place might not be very clean as they were in a wet and cold cave, but at this time, Zen couldn't care about anything else. Lavender held onto her spear, floating beside him like a ghost, a cold smile on her face. I've told you long ago to just take away her virginity energy yourself. If you had listened to me earlier, we wouldn't have gone into so much trouble, being chased by that Eddie guy, Lavender said, as she shook her head. The customs of the demon knight seemed to be very different from that of the human race. They didn't have any notion of taboo. Like now, unlike any human girl who would be too ashamed to see a scene of intimate intercourse, Lavender fixed her beautiful eyes on the entangling bodies on the ground. There was not a trace of embarrassment on her face, and she was clearly not trying to avoid seeing it. Instead, she took great interest in what was happening and had enjoyed watching the scene in front of her thoroughly. Chapter 687, Conflicting Feelings. Margaret was not expecting for things to come this far. Ever since she was young, she had been thoroughly accomplished. She could play the lyre, she was good at chess, her calligraphy and painting skills were excellent, and her innate talent for martial arts could make a lot of warriors green with envy. Coupled with her ravishing looks, it was no surprise that men continuously fell at her feet. Back in both the ethereal city and ethereal spirit sect, she was considered a lofty goddess whose holy presence was something ordinary people could only hope to bask in. Countless young, talented men had tried their hardest to curry her favor. There used to be a heaven-level talent in the ethereal spirit sect. To celebrate Margaret's birthday, he gathered 16 radiant light grass seeds from thousands of miles away to string into a bracelet as a gift for her. Those seeds only existed on the snowy mountains of the far west and were extremely hard to collect. They would glow faintly day and night, which made them viable to be turned into an ingenious gift. But in truth, people didn't just use radiant light grass seeds as makeshift beads for a bracelet. They were extremely valuable and the cost could be compared to that of a fairy weapon. Right after the young man presented Margaret with the bracelet, she immediately threw it on the ground as a show of blatant displeasure. The clan elders could do nothing but helplessly smile at her actions. Everyone in the clan doted on her. She was Xander's descendant. Despite his fury, the heaven-level talent could do nothing but accept her rejection. Margaret used to be filled to the brim with arrogance. She had never thought that the day would come when she was trapped in a dark, underground palace, weak and utterly helpless. It was the ultimate humiliation for someone like her. She tried to resist Zen with all her might, but it was futile. She was too weak to stop him. Her life vitality was restrained and, even if she could use it, she would have never been able to harm Zen's body since he had the strength of a high-grade fairy weapon. She had tried to graze his skin, but soon found that it was extremely tough. Her nails were on the verge of breaking, but she couldn't even make a single mark. She tried to bite him, but it was like sinking her teeth on a thick piece of metal. It hurt her teeth terribly, so she decided against it. "Let me go. If I manage to escape this time, I will definitely kill you," she told him, gritting her teeth in fury. Zen rolled his eyes. "You've already said that 3 times, he replied coldly. Lavender was right. This was the only way. Even if he got lucky and managed to escape the underground palace, it would be very difficult to take Margaret with him. Her purple power body would be completely useless to Eddie. Even if Zen himself presented Margaret to him, he wouldn't be interested in the slightest. A lot of girls liked Eddie, mostly due to the fact that he was the strongest warrior in all of Central Region. However, men like him who sought to attain the peak of martial arts would never be interested in the affairs of the heart. Only those evil warriors would indulge in sexual relationships with multiple women. There are at least a few hundred tunnels in this underground palace, Lavender sneered. Eddie won't be able to find this place in such a short period of time, but it is still better to end this quickly. Just then, a few tendrils of purple light surrounded the cave. They were like silk threads that constantly diffused and condensed around Zen and Margaret until they completely wrapped the two of them together and formed a purple cocoon. This purple energy was unique to the purple power body. Eddie needed 3 girls with purple power bodies and used the lustful demon array to activate and harness the said energy. But even without the use of the lustful demon array, just absorbing the energy like this was enough to benefit both Zen and Margaret. The purple power was an excellent element for cultivation. During the process, the purple cocoon would mix with their sweat and slowly be absorbed by their bodies. After the ordeal, Margaret lay on the cold, hard ground with her entire body covered in sweat. She could only stare at Zen with a dazed look in her eyes, though her gaze held a trace of doubt. She knew in her heart that she wanted to kill Zen, but at the same time, she didn't find him quite as hateful as before. Margaret had now been thrown into a state of confusion. Zen, on the other hand, was already up. He quickly tidied himself and took out a loose set of clothes from his space ring. He tossed the clothes to Margaret and turned his head away to avoid looking at her. His actions enraged Margaret. "You've taken my virginity, but now you're embarrassed to even look at me," she thought to herself. And she was right. Just now, Zen had pushed Margaret down in a fit of rage, but only because he felt cornered and desperate inside the dark, dangerous, underground palace with Eddie hot at his heels. He was afraid of Margaret falling into Eddie's hands, so for the greater good and also for the sake of his little sister, he had no choice but to do it. However, Zen was still a virgin, so he was still a bit embarrassed after they finished. In Margaret's eyes, however, Zen was blatantly trying to deny their relationship. "Put your clothes on and we'll find a way to get out of here," Zen said with his back to Margaret. For some reason, she refused. "No, I don't want to," she declared angrily. She quickly blushed at her impulsive words. Never did she think that she would be so shameless in front of a man. Chapter 688, Departure. Under such circumstances, acting recklessly and shamelessly would only lead to bad consequences. Zen did not even turn around as he strode forward. Lavender, on the other hand, held her spear in her hand and took a glance at Margaret. As she was being stared at in such an outrageous way, Margaret looked as if she had been bitten by a venomous snake. Her face was contorted by pain and embarrassment. She quickly curled up and grabbed some clothes to hide her body from the prying stares. Even her servants had never seen her bosom before. With a cold laugh, Lavender quickly caught up with Zen. Despite them being in an underground palace, a sudden cold wind blew. It scared Margaret, and so she hurried to put on Zen's spare clothes, which were the wrong size for her slender body. The clothes were loosely wrapped around her waist and legs, but they fit her bosom tightly, which made her highly uncomfortable. Lamenting the state of her clothes, it suddenly occurred to her that she had some spare clothes in her space ring. It was something that she had forgotten because of the panic that she had felt a while back. As she was about to get into those, however, she saw that both Zen and Lavender were leaving without waiting for her. They were already a long way from her, and so she clenched her teeth, ran forward, and tried to catch up with them instead of getting her clothes. Zen didn't look back. He walked forward, along the paths in the underground palace. Lavender glanced at Zen, unbothered by Margaret. She had a mysterious smile on her face. "What's wrong?" Zen asked out of curiosity. "How are you feeling right now?" Lavender asked and smiled. Zen hesitated for a moment and then replied, "I feel that my energy is flowing more smoothly in my belly. Also, my life vitality seems to have become much purer." Lavender once again smiled strangely. This wasn't the answer she wanted to hear. Since Zen had just deflowered Margaret and had taken her virginity energy, his cultivation base was supposed to be greatly improved. As much as Lavender wanted to pry even more, she realized that Zen would be embarrassed if she kept asking questions. And with that, she decided to drop the topic and continue in silence. This was how Lavender differed from Margaret. Having been a queen in the upper world, Lavender had never been spoiled. She knew how to ask questions without embarrassing others. She then shifted the conversation to Zen's body refinement and enhancement. Two seemingly opposite or contrary forces may actually be complementary, interconnected, and interdependent in the natural world, she started. As for female and male, if one of them is missing, then no life form will exist. In fact, there are some really powerful, effective and secretive female-male dual cultivation methods in the upper world. Dual cultivation methods. I was once told that they were dangerous and prohibited by the law. Zen asked with furrowed brows. Lavender smiled faintly and replied, "You people from Central Region have created some laughable and different standards to judge those things you people consider dangerous and illegal, although they're not. But you know, right, wrong, legal, illegal, they make no difference in the universe. Moreover, this dual cultivation method encourages males and females to practice their martial arts together, and to blend the seemingly opposite forces. In that way, the practitioners can reach the original and core power of this universe. So, now, tell me, what's wrong and what's right?" Zen just nodded agreement. At that moment, Margaret had already caught up with Zen and was standing behind them quietly. She kept her mouth shut and did nothing, except stand behind the two figures deep in conversation. Margaret had never been treated like an outsider, like a fool. But despite that, her past experiences had deeply affected her and her character, and it made her a hateful person. Now, she was starting to realize that Zen might choose to leave her behind. Zen had already taken her virginity energy. If she was left in this underground palace and got captured by Eddie, there would literally be no difference to Zen. He wouldn't be bothered by her captivity. After Margaret understood her situation, she felt that their positions had suddenly changed. Now, it was Margaret who would have to beg Zen to take her away. Otherwise, her lacking strength and power wouldn't be able to get her out of the underground palace. Or, even if she somehow was able to leave the palace, the whole dreamy swampland was waiting for her, ready to kill her as soon as it could. Being under such disadvantageous circumstance, Margaret decided that she would do nothing stupid that would further annoy Zen. Soon enough, Zen had finally had good luck in the underground palace. This underground palace was extremely complicated and treacherous. When Simon, the Poison King, lived here in seclusion, he nearly died during his initial exploration. That meant that even warriors of life and death realm could easily die here if they became lax and not vigilant. Luckily, Zen had been proceeding in exploring the palace successfully and smoothly, confronting nothing dangerous or abnormal. On the contrary, when Eddie and Simon entered the underground palace, they quickly ran into many troubles and immediately had to confront a wide variety of dangers that killed the three warriors of virtual tribulation realm. Despite being able to survive, Eddie and Simon came out of their battles injured. After a while, Zen was still nowhere to be seen. Eddie's temper was getting worse and worse. When his bad temper couldn't be curbed any longer, he channeled his anger on the infrastructure around him. To his great surprise, however, a formidable beast was disturbed. A few years ago, Simon had fought that beast and was nearly killed by it. Despite having the advantage of being in a rage, Eddie was still no match for it. Some warriors of the virtual tribulation realm and 2 warriors of life and death realm had been chased by this beast for a long time until they were finally able to escape from the underground palace. Around this time, Zen had already found another exit. Catching the light ahead of him, Zen moved quickly and rushed towards it. Margaret pursed her lips and followed Zen out of the palace. After exiting the underground palace, Zen decided to leave as soon as possible. Being in such a hopeless situation, he had taken Simon's advice. In order to get rid of Eddie, he needed to travel in the complicated underground palace. Both strength and luck saved him. Before Zen could fly away, Margaret, following closely behind him, finally opened her mouth. "Zen, will you leave me here?" she said warily. Her proud and stubborn eyes now looked dim and hopeless. After all, she was begging Zen not to leave her there, alone. "What was that? Does the little whiny princess still want to follow us?" Lavender sneered. "Weren't you just pestering Zen to let you go? Didn't you repeatedly tell us that you're not afraid of death?" In the depths of the dreamy swampland, regular warriors of internal elixir realm wouldn't be able to survive the dangers that it concealed. Not to mention, Margaret's cultivation base was still very low. She definitely lacked the abilities and strength to walk out of the dreamy swampland alive on her own. Zen didn't show any kind of emotion towards what Margaret was saying. Margaret, on the other hand, tried her best to convince him just by looking at him. The sneer on Lavender's face was starting to annoy Margaret. With her teeth clenched, she shouted, "Zen, if you leave me here, I'll be dead very soon." Zen thought for a moment. After what seemed like an eternity, he grabbed Margaret by her arm and muttered, "Don't worry. I'll take you out of this dreamy swampland." Zen had never been a stone-hearted person. If Margaret hadn't forced him ruthlessly, he wouldn't have treated her the way he did. Zen and Margaret flew with high speed. 2 hours later, they were already outside of the dreamy swampland. During their flight, they met some ferocious beasts, such as a murderous bird hiding itself behind the clouds, and a boa with the length of over 100 meters. However, Zen didn't stop and successfully avoided drawing their attention. Although he would get some precious materials by killing those beasts, he was more concerned about their safety at the moment, and he wouldn't waste any time fighting insignificant beasts. The 3 of them had entered the dreamy swampland from its east side. Now, they left through the west. They were already getting closer to Cloudy City. By nightfall, Zen had already reached Fire City, another medium-sized city. Fire City was much smaller than Cloudy City, Oracle City, Ethereal City and other large-sized cities. Only a few second-grade sects were active in it. As the Heavenly Evil sect gradually and aggressively expanded its influence, each and every warrior living in the Fire City was worrying about their career and safety. Because of that, those sects started to move to the south, and so did half of the warriors in the city. Even some regular citizens moved with them, seeking shelters and protection. Flying above the Fire City, Zen released Margaret's hand and said lightly, "We have to say goodbye here. Turn south, bypass the dreamy swampland and you'll get to Ethereal City. During the high-speed flight, Margaret had been lying on Zen's back comfortably. Hearing Zen say goodbye to her, she was dumbfounded. The war between Ethereal City and Heavenly Evil Sect wouldn't end easily. If Eddie failed to catch Zen, he would lead his warriors to attack Ethereal Spirit Sect again. The septuplets of Ethereal Spirit were already killed. Although many warriors of the Virtual Tribulation Realm and Xander were still protecting the Ethereal Spirit Sect, the sect protecting array wouldn't be good enough to resist the enemy attacks. Would she be able to help anyone if she returned to the Ethereal Spirit Sect? Margaret wanted to say something, but she stumbled over her words. Zen cast a glance at her but kept silent. If Eddie had sensed that he had already left Dreamy Swampland, he might already be pursuing them right now. The way to Cloudy City was long and treacherous, and it would be inconvenient if he traveled with Margaret. Amidst all these thoughts, Zen still said nothing. He just turned around and walked away from Margaret. Margaret, floating in the air, looked at Zen's disappearing figure. She bit her lip so hard that it bled. However, she could feel nothing except her resentment towards Zen's coldness and ruthlessness. Finally, she got emotional, and an idea started to materialize in her mind. She floated in the air for 5 minutes before she felt a fire burning in her stomach. Boom! In mere seconds, some purple flames shot from her stomach and wrapped her inside. Those purple flames didn't come from her life vitality, since her cultivation base had no fire attributes. It turned out that those flames were from the Purple Power World. Chapter 689, First Grade Purple Power Body. The purple flames that erupted from Margaret's belly wrapped around her body, and then she began to fall down. Look, a giant fireball is falling from the sky. Oh my goodness, it has smashed Wang's house. There's someone inside the fireball. Is it a martial artist? Most of the people left in Fire City were ordinary mortals. The martial artists with higher cultivation had left the city to go with their respective sects. For mortals, the war between different sects wasn't important to them. Even if the times had changed, they would have lived the same life. No matter who ruled this continent, he wouldn't make things difficult for mortals. Somehow, Margaret had managed to smash a tile roof house. The fierce purple flames were still burning, making it impossible for the people outside to get close. There were still some martial artists left in the city. Before long, 3 martial artists who had reached the nature level rushed over. But when they saw the purple flames, their expressions immediately changed. The power of the purple fire was so daunting that they didn't dare to approach it. They could only watch as the flames continued to burn until the house was completely reduced to ashes. There's a person in the fire. The purple flames can't even burn him. He must be a peerless powerhouse. You're right, I wonder where he's from and why he came to our city. Having only a fair amount of experience, the 3 martial artists didn't know what exactly was going on. After a short period of coma, Margaret slowly woke up. After that, she entered a very strange state, and the talent of her purple power body was quickly activated. Those who had purple power bodies could communicate with the purple power world. Furthermore, they could even cultivate in that place. However, every purple power body was activated at a different time. Back then, Marilyn forcibly activated her purple power body with the secret method that Eddie sought for her sake, and she had also kept her virginity energy for Eddie. On the contrary, Margaret activated her body after her virginity energy was taken, so the effects were completely different. Although the purple power body was rare, there were countless living creatures in the universe who possessed such. Several girls in the central region had purple power bodies, so it meant that there were a considerable number of purple power bodies in the entire universe. The purple power body could be at one of 6 grades. The humans in the upper world divided the 6 grades according to their colors. They were light purple, cyan purple, red purple, blue purple, exact purple, and black purple. Among them, black purple was the highest grade, and light purple was the lowest grade. Margaret's purple power body was at the black purple grade, which was also considered as the first grade. The higher the grade of the purple power body, the easier it was for the owner to communicate with the purple power world, and thus, the more abundant the resources she could obtain from the purple power world. Only when the first grade purple power body was activated could the owner be wrapped up by the purple fire, and no one else could get close to her. The purple fire was exceptionally substantial. Let alone the 3 martial artists who had reached the nature level, even those at the internal elixir and virtual tribulation realms didn't have the ability to approach a woman with a first-grade purple power body. Even the martial artists at the life and death realm had to use their full strength to resist the purple fire at the bare minimum. The purple flames burned day and night. That was something significant for the Fire City. It had attracted countless commoners, martial artists at the nature level and illuminating soul realm, but no one was able to figure out what was really happening. Finally, the 3 remaining martial artists at the internal elixir realm in Fire City had also arrived, but, just like the rest, none of them attempted to approach the purple flames either. After a day and a night, the purple flames finally began to diffuse. Margaret, who was sitting cross-legged within the purple flames, slowly opened her eyes. In just 24 hours, her temperament had undergone such a drastic change. In those hours that passed, Margaret did nothing else but cultivate in the purple power world. Not only did she understand the rules of the purple power world, but she also knew the secrets there and acknowledged just how superlative her own talent was. The purple power body was a special martial path which was very different from that of ordinary martial artists. It was a shortcut, but once one took the first step, she would be limited by the innate talent of her purple power body. For girls who had 6th grade purple power bodies, they could never be able to have the 5th grade purple power bodies in their lifetime regardless of their cultivation base. Only Margaret possessed a 1st grade purple power body. I never thought that there would be such a delicate girl within this purple fire. She's such a pretty young lady. She has already stepped into the internal elixir realm at such a young age. She must come from a great clan. The onlookers began to guess Margaret's origin and identity. The eyes of the 3 martial artists at the internal elixir realm who were standing not too far away flashed. They looked at each other, unpleasant smiles painted all over their faces. For the martial artists at the illuminating soul realm and the nature level, Margaret was a force to be reckoned with. But for the 3 gutsy martial artists, her name wasn't even worth mentioning. Although the girl in front of them had reached the primary level of the internal elixir realm and her foundation was very stable, her life vitality was another story. Having an unstable life vitality meant that she was extremely weak. From the looks of it, one could definitely say that the girl hailed from a big, wealthy family. According to the information they had received, Eddie was already attacking the ethereal spirit sect. Maybe, she was a martial artist that had escaped from a 3rd grade clan in Ethereal City. Even if she had no treasures in her possession, they thought that her delicate body was more than enough to compensate. The martial artist with a mustache walked over and politely asked, "Miss, is there anything I can help you with?" It was obvious that Margaret didn't have much confidence whenever Zen was around, but she sure looked down on other normal martial artists. As she was about to fly up, she gave the mustached man a cold look. However, the other 2 martial artists were one step ahead of her, blocking her path. "What's with the hurry? Since you've come all the way to Fire City, you should have a good rest before leaving." "That's right, how about having a drink with us?" Before Margaret's purple power body was activated, it was really difficult for her to get rid of those 3 men. Although they were at the primary level of the internal elixir realm and came from a 2nd grade sect, they were not that powerful at all. But at that particular time, Margaret was still so much weaker than them. However, she had already achieved a complete transformation. "Get out of my way," Margaret disdainfully said. "Don't be so rude," one of the 3 men retorted. The other mustached man giggled loudly and said, "It doesn't matter if she's rude. I like rude girls. When beauties are being rude, they look much prettier." Hearing that, Margaret's eye twitched. The 3 martial artists suddenly felt a powerful wind blowing. Then, some dark shadows appeared in the sky. As soon as they raised their heads, hundreds of giant ancient swords had emerged in the sky. Each of these swords was several dozen feet long, hanging in the air as if they could fall down at any moment. What's going on? Why are there so many swords in the sky? Where did they all come from?" As Margaret cleared her throat loudly, the huge swords smashed down on the 3 martial artists at once. Bang, 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 the swords smashed into the ground, creating deep cracks. Fire City wasn't big, so when these swords crashed right through, it caused the entire city to shake. Those who didn't know what was happening thought it was just an earthquake that hit them. The swords covered a vast area when they fell. The 3 martial artists wanted to dodge, but it was already too late. They didn't even have the time to scream. Death, a gory one, came after them really quickly. With a smug look on her face, Margaret then flew into the sky. That was the first time she had ever killed fellow martial artists. After Margaret flew high up in the sky, a trace of hesitation appeared on her face. She didn't know whether she should return to Ethereal City or go to Cloudy City. As she looked towards the direction where Zen had disappeared, a hint of grief appeared in her eyes. Eventually, she decided to fly to Cloudy City. The experiences she had in the Purple Power world had allowed her to know her own potential and true strength. Unlike before, she now had a bit of confidence in her own abilities. Despite everything that she had accomplished, she still didn't know what she genuinely wanted. Chapter 690, The Internal Strife of Cloud Hall. The warriors of Fire City could only stare at the scene before them. A huge, gaping crater had been left behind by the giant swords. The crater itself was littered with multiple sword marks. The miserable state of the three warriors at Internal Elixir Realm plunged the other warriors' hearts in fear. As soon as the woman left, they all began to talk among themselves in hushed tones. "That woman is so vicious," one of them exclaimed. "She just cut these three mighty warriors into minced meat. Thank goodness I was able to run away. Otherwise I would have been killed as well. That woman looked soft and pretty, but she shouldn't be underestimated. Her ruthlessness is no joke. It's best if we don't get involved in this chaotic world." During this time, Zen was approaching Cloudy City at an extremely high speed. He had been flying the whole day and night without a break, and had replenished his life vitality by using quite a lot of Supreme Life Vitality crystals along the way. Ever since his return from the Sea God continent, Zen had wanted to return to Cloud Hall as soon as possible. He hadn't expected that he'd be delayed with the numerous troubles that arose along the way. But that did not matter now. As the sun rose and painted the horizon with the colors of daybreak, Zen couldn't help but smile once he saw Cloudy City in front of him. After a long, arduous journey, he was finally back. However, a trace of doubt crossed his features once he got close. "Huh," he muttered to himself when he saw the sky above Cloudy City completely empty. Above Cloudy City, there used to be a huge floating rock which Cloud Hall was built on. This floating rock would change its location every now and then, but only around Cloudy City's immediate vicinity. However, no matter where he looked, Zen couldn't find any trace of Cloud Hall. It seemed that it had completely disappeared. Had something happened? Zen immediately flew towards Cloudy City, his brows furrowed in worry at the strange situation. Before he left, Zen had set up a sect-protecting array around Cloud Hall. His array assured its impenetrability against the threat of strong opposing forces. Other than perhaps the Heavenly Evil sect, Cloud Hall was virtually untouchable by the other sects. The Heavenly Evil sect currently had their hands full attacking the Ethereal Spirit sect, so it was unlikely that the Cloud Hall would be besieged by Eddie's forces anytime soon. Besides, if the Cloud Hall had been in trouble, the members of the Shi clan would have told him. There was no point in speculation. As soon as Zen entered Cloudy City, he headed straight for the Cloud School. Cloud School was one of the several sects under Cloud Hall. Its status was held in slightly higher regard than the Brahma sect and the other second-grade sects due to its close links with the Cloud Hall. Various clans from Cloudy City preferred to send their people into Cloud School since it had produced more elites than the other sects. Two warriors at Internal Elixir Realm approached Zen as soon as he arrived. "Who are you?" one of them asked. A hint of wariness was evident on his face as soon as he discovered Zen's cultivation level. The head of their sect was only at the late stage of the Internal Elixir Realm, but the warrior was by no means afraid of Zen given Cloud School's status. However, the Cloud Hall was in trouble now, and the warrior was afraid that Zen's arrival might bring variables. "Where is your leader?" Zen asked. "Who are you?" The warrior repeated his question. "Why are you looking for our sect leader?" Zen's eyes flashed coldly as he said, "I'm Zen from Cloud Hall." "Zen," the two warriors exclaimed in unison, panic flashing through their eyes. "You're back." Their reactions puzzled Zen. Why would these two people panic when they heard my name? He thought, eyeing them suspiciously. Did they actually not want me to come back? He thought about these things, but did not let it show on his face. "Yes, I'm back," he confirmed. "Where is your leader? I want to see him." He ordered more firmly this time. He went to Cloud Hall," the warrior answered. "Where is Cloud Hall now? Why did it leave Cloudy City?" The warrior stuttered. "I don't know either." Zen narrowed his eyes at his response. The warrior probably didn't want to tell him where the Cloud Hall was and could only stutter that he did not know. However, Zen was not about to let it go. He pulled the warrior by the collar and stared at him coldly. "You don't know, or you don't want to tell me. I'm going to ask you one last time. Where is Cloud Hall?" An intense malicious aura emanated from Zen, effectively terrifying his opponent. Cloud Hall is now located 30 miles to the northwest of Cloudy City, the other warrior answered for his friend. If you head northwest, you'll be able to find it easily. Zen nodded and released the warrior from his grip. Something must have happened to the Cloud Hall, but these two warriors were evidently not going to tell him the details and he was too lazy to bother with them. The only course of action was to go to the Cloud Hall himself. Zen immediately flew towards the direction the warrior had told him. Once he was gone, the warrior that refused to tell Zen Cloud Hall's location glared at his companion and snapped, "Why did you tell him? Our family's plan will be ruined. We'll also be implicated as well." The other warrior sneered, "Seriously? Are you stupid? That's Zen. He's back, and he's entered the virtual tribulation realm. He could already defeat a divine-level talent at the internal elixir realm back when he was still at the illuminating soul realm. What makes you think he wouldn't be able to kill us with a single blow if we refused to tell him?" The warrior fell silent at his companion's words. "This is bad," he muttered. "We're really in trouble now that he's back." Meanwhile, Zen was already growing nervous as he flew northwest. He could travel 30 miles in the blink of an eye, but the thought of not knowing what was happening made it feel like a century. The two warriors were obviously hiding something from him. He knew that they knew about his relationship with Letitia. If there really was trouble in Cloud Hall, they shouldn't have hesitated in telling him its location. They clearly did not want to see him return, which meant Letitia was the one in trouble. Soon, a huge floating palace appeared in front of him. An enchanted barrier encapsulated the entire floating island and its surface flashed and rippled serenely in the light of the morning sun. This was the light of water that was designed to block the full-powered attack of a warrior at the life and death realm. Zen had established this enchanted barrier specifically to block Eddie, but now it seemed that it was blocking him. It was impossible for him to directly break through the enchanted barrier with his current cultivation level, and he didn't see any guards that could open it for him. Bang! A light flashed within the depths of Cloud Hall, followed by a violent life vitality fluctuation. Zen couldn't help but frown. Someone is fighting within Cloud Hall, he thought. He quickly went around the enchanted barrier and landed on its base. As the creator of the light of water, he knew just where the core of the array was located. The enchanted barrier was like a huge eggshell that surrounded Cloud Hall from top to bottom. Once Zen reached the core, which was located at the bottom, all he needed to do was extend an arm and use a bit of energy to modify the array to create a break, allowing him to easily slip through. Once he was inside, he directly rushed into the depths of Cloud Hall. He could more or less guess what was currently happening. It was quite obvious that the Cloud Hall was currently in a state of internal strife. Cloud Hall's defenses could be considered the best out of all sects in the central region. Even the heavenly evil sect would not be able to penetrate through the sect-protecting array Zen himself had set up. However, it was a different story if the threat came from within Cloud Hall itself. After cultivating the Sutra of Empyrean Goddess, Letitia quickly recovered her full strength and, after practicing anew 9 times, was finally ready to make a breakthrough to the life and death realm. Reaching the life and death realm was not difficult for Letitia. What was difficult was the life and death crises that came with it. Anyone who was able to enter the life and death realm had to go through a few life and death crises whose difficulty varied from person to person. The more potential a warrior had, the more powerful his strength and the harder his life and death crisis would be. Letitia's Sutra of Empyrean Goddess had been extremely troublesome to cultivate, but led to her acquiring far greater strength than other warriors at the same level. After she reached the life and death realm, her life and death crises were also going to be more terrifying than what any ordinary warrior would have faced. It was at this critical juncture that the Zhou clan of Cloudy City joined forces with several third-grade clans and suddenly launched an attack against Cloud Hall. Chapter 691, Scapegoat. Cloud Hall had significantly risen in strength during the past few years. It was not just Letitia alone who had grown stronger, but Cloud Hall's martial artists had all steadily improved. After it had set up the small circulation killing array, Cloud Hall was considered a quasi-5th-grade sect, though, in the eyes of the entire central region, it was already as good as a 5th-grade sect which could measure up to the ethereal spirit sect. It was only a bit inferior to the ethereal spirit sect in terms of history and legacy. Once Letitia successfully made it through to the life and death realm, Cloud Hall's status as a 5th-grade sect would be unshakable. By then, by taking advantage of the soaring influence of Cloud Hall, Letitia might be able to develop the Cloud Hall into a 6th-grade sect, and also the first sacred place in the central region. Unexpectedly, during a very critical moment for Letitia's breakthrough, a serious internal conflict arose within Cloud Hall. It wasn't anything sudden. The seeds of internal strife within the sect had already been planted decades ago. Cloud Hall was initially established through Cloud School's constant development and its alliance with several third-grade clans like the Zhou clan, Shen clan, Fei clan, and Wu clan of the Cloudy City. Over the years, it eventually grew out of Cloud School and slowly developed to what it was today. No matter how the Cloud Hall developed, the position of Cloud Hall's leader had always been taken up by the descendants of these several great clans. Back then, Imogen had not come from any of these noble clans but was an extremely talented disciple of a iridescent sect which was affiliated with Cloud Hall. She was powerful, strong, and extremely talented. A few major clans in Cloudy City were a bit dissatisfied with her origins but could not really argue against Imogen's skills and competence. It was different with Letitia. Although she was raised up in Cloud School, the origin of her birth made it pretty clear that she was an outsider. Moreover, there was no shortage of talents from the various big clans. Emmanuel, for instance, had the strength and competency to vie for the position of leader. However, Imogen passed the position down to Letitia, which caused quite an uproar for the other large clans, especially the Zhou clan led by Emmanuel. Though they could admit that Letitia was more outstanding than Emmanuel in certain areas, her leadership had brought about a great change to the sect that a lot of them didn't quite agree with. For example, her treatment of Zen was contested upon by many. It was only after Zen had built an indestructible sect-protecting array for the Cloud Hall that they shut up. However, it wasn't enough. Those large noble clans were not as far-sighted as Imogen was. Even if Letitia brought many benefits to the Cloud Hall, they could not allow an outsider to take control of Cloud Hall. Emmanuel was the one who opposed Letitia the most, which was why he had practically seized every opportunity to try and take down Letitia from her position. Unfortunately, none of his efforts succeeded. However, Emmanuel had seen an opportunity. Imogen had gone overseas with the independent warrior, the Venerable Starry, to try to seek fortune and survive her next life and death crisis. With her gone, Letitia effectively lost her strongest support while she was on the verge of breaking through to the life and death realm. She was about to face a horrifying life and death crisis, and any pressure exerted on the side would be enough to cause her to fail. How could Emmanuel let go of such a good opportunity? Imogen had long since been due for a life and death crisis. Couple this with the fact that not many people really returned from their overseas exploration for lucky chances, Imogen was as good as gone in Emmanuel's eyes. Emmanuel would never get such a golden chance as this one. He had plotted this for quite a while now, and all he needed to do was to take advantage of Letitia's current situation to push his plan towards fruition. The outside of Letitia's ice palace had been covered with long and thin ice thorns which made it resemble a giant hedgehog. In the ice palace, there were also a couple dozen martial artists that tried to resist Emmanuel with all their might. Now, the people of Cloud Hall were divided into three parties. The first party was led by Emmanuel, who vied for the position of leader. They were pretty resolute and understood that if they failed, all of them would be implicated and even wiped out by Letitia once she made her breakthrough. The second party, led by Fernandez, was neutral. They were unwilling to topple Letitia, but they all came from the third-grade clans in Cloudy City. They found themselves caught in a dilemma, so they decided to take the easy way out and support neither side. That did not mean that they escaped the pressure though. Fernandez, for example, came from the Fei clan, who fully supported Emmanuel. The conflict between his family background and morals undoubtedly put a huge strain on him. The third party consisted of those who stood on Letitia's side. It was led by Morphans and many disciples of the younger generation. These younger disciples did not have much relationship with the large clans in Cloudy City and regarded Letitia as the core figure of Cloud Hall. For the past few days, Emmanuel had launched a series of attacks upon Letitia's ice palace, but all of them had been forcefully blocked by Morphans. The problem was, the party led by Morphans was not very powerful in strength. They were also greatly outnumbered by Emmanuel's forces. Moreover, disciples of the younger generation were not as powerful as the other elders. Besides the few elders who were at the virtual tribulation realm, most of them were only at the internal elixir realm or even at the illuminating soul realm. It was a miracle that they were able to hold out for so many days, and it was all thanks to Rocher. Rocher sat in the middle of the square in front of the ice palace with a dark green sword in his hand. His eyes bled and blood surrounded him for at least 20 feet. Patrick, Louis, and the others stood guard beside Rocher with Saint Morphans and the other martial artists gathered around them. Rocher, Patrick, and Louis had all greatly improved their cultivation levels over the past 2 years. All 3 of them had managed to step into the internal elixir realm, with Rocher recently ascending to the middle stage. However, with his cultivation level alone, it was impossible for him to change the situation. After all, no matter how talented Rocher was, he would still find it difficult to fight against virtual tribulation realm warriors. Good thing he had a trick up his sleeve. As luck would have had it, Rocher had unintentionally comprehended a higher level of the heavenly sword, specifically, the sword eye. This enabled him to gather the momentum of the heavens into his sword and store as much of his sword intent as he wanted. As long as he was given enough time, he could manage a strike capable of killing masters at the life and death realm and soul sea realm. Of course, this was only in theory. The momentum of the heavens was powerful, but Rocher's capacity was limited. If he absorbed too much for too long, it could greatly damage his body, which was evident with how much his eyes bled. However, it was Rocher's presence at the entrance that prevented anyone from charging in. He could only launch one strike with his sword, but that one strike alone would immediately kill the fool who dared to charge into the palace. No one in Emmanuel's force was willing to take that strike. The last time he used this technique was 3 days ago to kill the Fey clan's master, Lori Fey, who was a martial artist at the late stage of the virtual tribulation realm and cultivated the earth law. Lori Fey could be considered as a master of defense in the Cloudy City. His stupid earth cultivation, which was a perfect display of earth law, enabled him to diffuse enemy attacks dealt to his body and reroute it to the ground where the earth could bear the brunt of the damage. He had used this stupid earth cultivation to block the attacks that were launched from the Ice Palace. Even Saint Morphin's attacks failed to immobilize him. Once he reached the square, Rocher immediately rushed forward and struck him with his sword. Nobody expected that a disciple at the mere internal elixir realm would be able to unleash such powerful strength. Lori Fey was madly channeling the stupid earth cultivation to try and fight the sheer amount of force contained within Rocher's strike. It was so powerful that the force diffused into the ground managed to turn the earth within 100 feet into fine powder. But he was still unable to break Rocher's strike. In the end, Rocher's strike was too great and ended up killing Lori Fey with a single strike. This sheer demonstration of inhumane force was enough to scare all the warriors at the virtual tribulation realm from charging towards the palace. Whoever dared would certainly die. Thus, Emmanuel could only occasionally attack the Ice Palace from afar, which could barely cause real harms. "We can't keep on like this," Emmanuel screamed in frustration. He had initially planned to capture Letitia in the shortest time possible, but his warriors refusing to storm the palace in fear of Rocher significantly prolonged things. If Letitia made it through to the life and death realm, then all his efforts would have been in vain. He pointed at a virtual tribulation realm warrior from the Shen clan. "You go up there and take them on." As long as they forced Rocher to attack one person, Emmanuel's forces could rush in and kill the rest of Letitia's supporters. To put it bluntly, what they needed was a scapegoat. Chapter 692, Kill 3 with one strike. When the warrior from the Shen clan, who was at the virtual tribulation realm, heard this, his expression instantly changed. Whenever Rocher used his sword, someone would surely be killed. He didn't dare to fight against Rocher as it was simply courting death. Every warrior at the virtual tribulation realm cared about his own life. While it was true that these clans were joining hands this time to work with Emmanuel to fight against Letitia, it was also known that they were only doing it for their own interests. If Emmanuel were to become the new leader of the Cloud Hall, all of them would reap some kind of special benefit. But still, the whole thing was not worth it for them if they had to pay the price with their own lives. "I'm not going." "You can go if you want to," the warrior from the Shen clan said, shaking his head fervently. Emmanuel gritted his teeth and said coldly, "If you are all afraid of death, how will we barge into the Ice Palace?" All of the warriors at the virtual tribulation realm looked at each other in silence. A few moments passed until someone said in a low voice, "Are you not afraid of death? Go first if you are not." "Yes, Emmanuel, you can go first. If you are the first one to charge, then we will be right behind you. As long as you take the lead, there's no way we wouldn't follow you." As they shouted their sentiments, Emmanuel became increasingly angrier. "If I take the lead, I'll be killed by Rocher," he thought to himself, looking around at the now impassioned warriors. "Then the leader of the Cloud Hall won't belong to the Zhou clan. It will belong to the Shen clan, Fei clan or Wu clan. I'm not that stupid," he cursed inwardly. "Dad, I'll go." The one who spoke was Frank's elder brother and Emmanuel's eldest son, Finley. "You," Emmanuel said, stunned for a moment. Then, he suddenly smirked and shook his head, saying, "You are no match for Rocher." Finley was only at the internal elixir realm. Even if he was willing to go first, Rocher would not attack him as there was no need to do so. Saint Morphans could kill Finley as easily as a single stab. There was no reason for Emmanuel to send his son to his death. "If none of you are willing to go now, that jerk will reach the life and death realm. Do you know what the consequences will be?" Emmanuel asked coldly. Everyone suddenly became quiet, as if stunned by the question. From ancient times, those who tried to rebel but failed had come upon nothing good. Not only would they suffer, their clans would also be severely punished. Although it was impossible for Cloud Hall to wipe out these third-grade clans, still the punishment they were going to face was not something they could take easily. "Then, how about we attack together?" Finally, the warriors cheered in agreement, vicious expressions appearing on their faces. They were really going all out this time as there was no other way out for them. They had been stuck here for so long just because they didn't want to be the first one to be killed. Emmanuel nodded and said, "All right. We've delayed for far too long now. If all of us attack together, we'll definitely be able to take down the Ice Palace and kill that evil jerk." He had been planning this for more than a day or two now. This was the opportunity he had waited for so long, and so when it showed itself, he quickly and firmly grasped it. "Cloud Hall belongs to our clans, not to Letitia Ning. Our victory or downfall will be decided in one move. No, we will definitely win. Saint Morphans cannot stop us." As long as this group of warriors charged forward together, at most, only one of them would be killed by Rocher. Everything would become settled once Saint Morphans was dealt with. The remaining elders at the virtual tribulation realm were nothing to fear. Although the juniors at the internal elixir realm were fearless, their cultivation levels were still far too low. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. After the discussion was over, Emmanuel and the others finally decided to act on their plan and started rushing up to the Ice Palace. Rocher was still on the platform in front of the Ice Palace, unmoving, his eyes closed as blood kept flowing out from them. He looked extremely terrifying. "They're coming," Patrick whispered in Rocher's ear. His face darkened as he relayed this warning to Rocher, who was sitting beside him. "I know." Rocher took out the long sword from his space ring and gripped it tightly. Although his heavenly sword was powerful, it could only be used in a single strike, and after that, he must recharge his energy. Obviously, he could only strike once as Emmanuel and his companions would not give him a second chance. Therefore, Rocher was hesitant about who he should kill with this sword strike. How he would achieve the maximum effect with a single sword strike was the huge predicament he was having at the moment. Saint Morphans and the other elders also stood at his side, their expressions abnormally solemn. They were well aware that their chances of victory were very small, close to zero. Despite the bitter truth, they still chose to defend Letitia. Those standing here, in front of the Ice Palace, were people who had sworn their lives to follow Letitia. Since everyone had chosen to stand here, they had already decided to sacrifice their lives if needed. "Pull out your weapons." Swish, swish, swish. On the platform, everyone was ready for the upcoming battle. A murderous intent permeated the air as the distance between the two opposing groups continued to close. At this moment, Rocher suddenly made his move. Although it seemed like Rocher was sitting on the ground, he was actually floating 2 inches away from it. At this moment, he was constantly gliding along the ground, adjusting his position. When Rocher moved, the expressions of Emmanuel and the other warriors at the virtual tribulation realm changed. If Rocher were to strike, there was no doubt that someone was going to die. As for who, that would solely depend on Rocher. "Charge over and stop him from thrusting," someone shouted. All of the warriors at the virtual tribulation realm rushed towards Rocher at an extremely fast speed. At this time, Saint Morphans and the other warriors were also charging forward to stop them. After Rocher adjusted his angle, his eyes that were bleeding profusely suddenly opened. 2 sword shadows appeared in his eyes. They brewed in his dark, deep eyes, causing his eyes to become abnormally sharp. If anyone were to look him in the eye, that person would feel as if his eyes were being pierced by needles, and it would be unbearable. Rocher, who had opened his eyes, abruptly brandished his sword. "Disperse." When Emmanuel saw Rocher facing him, he was immediately scared out of his wits. For a long time now, he had dreamed and imagined himself as the person who would rule Cloud Hall. If he were to be assassinated by Rocher right now, he would truly be the unluckiest guy in the whole entire world. He couldn't accept any of that. Just as Emmanuel was dodging the upcoming strike with all his might, Rocher's sword struck out. Suddenly, a strange aura radiated from Rocher's eyes. This aura was both majestic and energetic. People who stood in front of him would feel like they were so insignificant. This feeling usually appeared when a warrior was alone, looking up at the sky. Rocher had accumulated the power of the heavens and he chose to let it out at this moment. Everyone immediately felt as if the world had been turned upside down. Rocher was representing the heavens and everything else in the world. Even though everyone knew that this was an illusion created by Rocher after he struck out with his sword, their minds were still affected by his imposing aura, causing them to fail to think clearly. Whoosh! An extremely sharp sword radiance shot out. The speed of the sword radiance was so fast that there was no time for anyone to dodge. Everyone only saw a flash of light before they heard three distinct sounds ringing in their ears. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. They were the sounds of flesh being pierced by the sword radiance. At that moment, time seemed to stop. Regardless of whether it was Saint Morphans or Emmanuel, everyone stood still, frozen in their spots. Everyone was stunned, and none of them dared to breathe. After a short while, the bodies of three warriors at the virtual tribulation realm swayed. Their eyes were filled with unwillingness and anger. Why me? Plop, plop, plop. With a thrust of his sword, Rocher killed three warriors at the virtual tribulation realm. Despite Rocher being only at the middle stage of the internal elixir realm, the heavenly sword that he cultivated was so strong. It stunned everyone. Even Zen could not do this when he had just become a warlord. Lucas, Elijah. A few angry roars came from Emmanuel's side. Seeing this, Emmanuel let out a long sigh. Luckily, Rocher's sword was not aimed at him. Otherwise, he would be a corpse on the ground by now. Charge! Kill that brat! Emmanuel gritted his teeth and shouted. The remaining warriors at the virtual tribulation realm were enraged. They were all warriors from third-grade clans, and those three warriors who had just been killed were their own brothers. How could they not be angry at this moment? The key point was that Rocher needed a long time to gather his energy after a strike. After that, he would only be an ordinary warrior at the internal elixir realm and would be of no threat to any warrior at the virtual tribulation realm. This was the right time for them to launch their attacks. Chapter 693. Arrive at the right time. Rocher's sword attack was originally meant to kill Emmanuel and it wasn't going to be hard for him to do that. Emmanuel was the leader of the rebels, and it was him who had gathered all the third-grade clans in Cloudy City. However, for some reason, the moment he made his move, Rocher changed his mind. Even if he managed to kill Emmanuel, it would not change the current situation too much. If Emmanuel was killed, Rocher and his companions would still be unable to win the battle. The rebels could find someone else to replace Emmanuel. This was why Rocher had chosen to kill three warriors at the virtual tribulation realm at such a tricky angle. And even after that massacre, the effect on the situation as a whole was negligible. Saint Morphans and Emmanuel were well matched in strength. The two of them, when engaged in battle, were fierce and swift, but the number of warriors on Emmanuel's side was still much higher than those on Saint Morphan's side. As for Patrick, Louis, and all the other warriors at Internal Elixir Realm, they had no way of fighting against cultivators at the Virtual Tribulation Realm, and they lost the battle in the blink of an eye. Whoosh! A warrior at the Virtual Tribulation Realm finally broke through the defense line. Holding a large, emerald green saber in his hand, he rushed furiously towards Rocher. Since you killed my brother, you are going to die too. Even before he had finished speaking, his saber had slid across and come down with a great might towards Rocher's neck. Rocher lightly slid across the ground and the sword in his hand struck out once more. Ding! The sword was easily blocked by Rocher's opponent. Rocher's strongest move while practicing swordsmanship was the heavenly sword, and it had taken him a long time to accumulate the strength necessary to use it. Without this accumulation of strength, he was not a match for a warrior at the Virtual Tribulation Realm. Just as the warrior blocked Rocher's sword, he suddenly turned around and threw a punch straight at Rocher's chest. Bang! The fist landed heavily, and caused the victim's chest to cave in deep. His entire body was thrown backwards and he rolled on the ground for several rounds before slowly coming to a stop. As Rocher gasped for air lying on the ground, stubbornness could be seen in his eyes. He had chosen to side with Letitia after discussing it with Patrick and Louis. The main reason why they had chosen that side was mainly because of Zen. They knew the relationship between Zen and Letitia, and even though, at the beginning, the three of them were slightly hesitant, later on, even the usually timid Louis had stepped forward to protect Letitia. There was no reason why Roche and Patrick wouldn't do the same. As for whether their choice was right or wrong, Roche wasn't clear. Perhaps sometimes, warriors didn't have to rank their decisions by judging whether it would yield a profit or not. Perhaps some things were just more important than their own lives. A little brat at the internal elixir realm like you killed 3 warriors at the virtual tribulation realm. What a pity. I wonder how far you would have gone in the future. Roche's opponent slowly walked towards him as the saber in his hand repeatedly flashed with a cold light that essentially reeked of death. At that very moment, an agile figure rushed out of nowhere. It was so fast that it dazzled everyone's eyes and could not be distinguished from the streaks of light it left behind. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. Because his speed was too fast, countless clones were formed, surrounding the warrior at the virtual tribulation realm who was about to kill Roche. This figure was none other than Louis. Such a strange movement skill could be considered outstanding among the warriors at the internal elixir realm, but to a warrior at the virtual tribulation realm, it was nothing. Just as Louis was constantly moving around Roche's opponent, the latter suddenly threw out a punch. Boom! His enemy had accurately identified Louis from the clones, and with a single punch, he had sent Louis flying backwards. The warrior revealed a scornful smile. Your movement skill is indeed remarkable. When I was at the internal elixir realm, I was unable to utilize such a wonderful movement skill. Unfortunately, your cultivation level is too low for you to be able to fight me. As soon as his voice faded, a giant hand suddenly appeared above his head. The hand was like a solid substance as it fiercely slapped down. Humph! The warrior didn't even raise his head as he slashed his saber upwards. The saber radiance that was produced by his intense life vitality instantly sliced the huge hand into a million tiny pieces. Even Patrick's attack was unable to stop this warrior. Instantly after that, the warrior arrived in front of Roche and stepped onto his hand. The large saber in his hand was already at Roche's neck. It's a pity. If you hadn't chosen to stand by Letitia's side, you would have lived to become a powerful warrior in the future. Since you have chosen a path of death yourself, you cannot blame me for bestowing you with such a deathly gift. Roche, at his current level of strength, was enough to be ranked among the divine level talents. Killing him was not a small loss to the Cloud Hall. After all, this group of people was only there for the position of leader of the Cloud Hall and not to destroy the Cloud Hall. However, Roche could not blame them for killing him as he himself had chosen to stand on Letitia's side. A trace of decisiveness appeared on Roche's face. He was firm and resolute even in the face of such a dangerous moment. Ever since he had made his decision, he had been mentally prepared for failure. Roche closed his eyes as he looked at the rapidly descending large saber. But shortly after, the saber didn't fall. Roche frowned and wondered, could it be that this guy wants to mock me before killing me? Does he want a cat-and-mouse game? However, when Roche opened his eyes, he saw a hand holding onto the blade of the saber. The saber was only a few inches away from him, but it was unable to go any further. Who is it? Who could possibly catch the saber of a warrior at the virtual tribulation realm with his bare hand? Roche wondered. He turned around to look who it was, and then a broad smile appeared on his face. He had once imagined that Zen would return, but he had never expected him to appear at such a crucial moment. Zen, you've returned, Roche exclaimed. Zen nodded his head and then used a bit of force to grab onto the saber. The next moment, the top-grade fairy weapon bent in his hand. The tough surface of the saber was as fragile as a piece of paper in Zen's hand. Everyone was still immersed in the slaughter, and therefore, no one had noticed the commotion. Only Louis had an ecstatic smile on his face, while Patrick let out a long sigh as he thought to himself, Roche, we made the right decision. As for Roche's opponent, he was completely dumbfounded. He looked blankly at the bent saber in his hand, and then looked blankly at Zen, seemingly unable to react at all. I am back. This time, Zen suddenly roared towards the crowd. With the infusion of life vitality into his voice, Zen's roar was immediately heard clearly by everyone. When the warriors who were fighting heard this fierce roar, they all stopped. Even Saint Morphans and Emmanuel pushed each other away as their gazes gathered on Zen's face. Of course, the two had completely different expressions. When Saint Morphans saw Zen, a smile instantly appeared on his face, and he shouted in ecstasy, Zen! You've reached the virtual tribulation realm. At the same moment, Emmanuel's face was marked by a gloomy expression. Just now, Rocher had killed 3 warriors at the virtual tribulation realm with a single sword strike, but Emmanuel was safe and sound. Emmanuel was confident that he would surely be the new leader of Cloud Hall. As long as he could stall St. Morphin's and wait for everyone else to clean up the warriors, he would be able to charge into the Ice Palace and kill Letitia. If all his plans were being carried out in an orderly manner, the entire Cloud Hall would be his a few days later. With the protection of the small circulation killing array, even if he faced the heavenly evil sect, he was not afraid. After becoming the leader of the Cloud Hall, he could use the resources of Cloud Hall to make a breakthrough. His future prospects were limitless. It just so happened that at this critical moment, that Zen had actually come back. Wasn't he supposed to be dead? Although most people in the Cloud Hall believed that Zen wasn't dead, Emmanuel was paranoid enough to believe that Zen would definitely be dead and that there was no possibility of him coming back. How could Emmanuel not be surprised when he saw Zen standing not far away and having reached the virtual tribulation realm? The expressions of the warriors of the 3rd grade clans also darkened. How were they going to deal with Zen? Humph, Zen, so what if you're back? You are only at the early stage of the virtual tribulation realm and that's nothing compared to my warriors. You seriously think you can turn the tables all by yourself? What a joke. Guys, let's go and kill him. Emmanuel ordered. Yes, he is just a warrior at the virtual tribulation realm. He is no match for us. Let's kill him together. Emmanuel's words were very clever. The number of warriors on Letitia's side was far too small, not to mention that most of them were only at the internal elixir realm. Even with Zen's help, the tables were not going to be turned. 4 warriors at the virtual tribulation realm activated their life vitality at the same time. Their bodies flashed as they instantly surrounded Zen from 4 different directions. Chapter 694, Reverse of the Situation. 4 virtual tribulation realm cultivators attacked Zen at the same time, 2 of whom were at the middle stage of the virtual tribulation realm. This was proof of how wary they were of Zen. Back when Zen was still in the illuminating soul realm, he had already been able to defeat divine-level talents who had reached the internal elixir realm. And now that he had stepped into the virtual tribulation realm, nobody knew exactly how powerful he truly was. But they thought that no matter how powerful Zen was, it would still be difficult for him to fight 4 virtual tribulation realm warriors at once. Morphin's expression changed when he saw the number of enemy warriors attacking Zen. He took a step forward as his body began to become translucent and was about to use the mystical pace to approach and help Zen when Emmanuel thrust his spear at him suddenly, forcing him back. Everyone's eyes were focused on Zen. Rocher, Patrick, and their companions were worried, and it showed on their faces. It didn't matter that Zen's cultivation base had risen magnificently in the last 2 years. They still thought that he wouldn't be able to fight 4 virtual tribulation realm experts by himself. On the other hand, Zen's eyes glittered with an excited confidence as he was surrounded by the 4 virtual tribulation realm experts. His body became vague, like a mirage, constantly stretching and moving like a leaf creating ripples on water. Is that an illusion? Is he using a bodily movement skill? The 4 virtual tribulation realm cultivators found themselves thinking as they watched Zen in exasperation. But since they had already made their moves and Zen hadn't dodged them or made a move, how could they let go of this opportunity and not attack him? Different kinds of attacks rained down on Zen in the blink of an eye. However, a strange scene played out before everyone's eyes. It looked like none of those attacks were touching Zen and he remained completely unharmed. It did look like the warriors' swords and sabers were striking or stabbing Zen's body, but since Zen's body looked like something that didn't physically exist at the moment, they seemed to slice through thin air. Morphin's was fighting Emmanuel, but as he looked over in Zen's direction, his concern turned to amazement. He's applying space law, and it is the space law of a higher layer. Morphin's exclaimed, immensely surprised. He wondered rather excitedly, where had Zen been these past 2 years? How did he achieve this? Emmanuel, too, had his attention on the fight between Zen and the 4 other warriors. When he saw Zen's strange bodily movement skill, he was shocked beyond reason. How is this even possible? Emmanuel muttered disbelievingly. A bad premonition presented itself to Emmanuel, telling him that he had probably underestimated Zen's strength yet again. It felt like déjà vu, because he had experienced this exact same feeling the very first time he had seen Zen. At first, Emmanuel had thought that Zen was just a lucky fellow who had ascended from the Cloud sect. He had almost killed Zen when they had come face to face at the close of the Cloud Road. But never had he thought that Letitia would stop him and that she would go on and demand him to scram. At the time, Emmanuel had set out to kill Zen but had never gotten the chance. After that, Zen had quickly risen up to become a martial arts star in the central region. His cultivation base had improved at an astonishing speed that was far beyond Emmanuel's imagination. Emmanuel had felt greatly threatened once Zen had reached the illuminating soul realm. Because of that exact same reason, Emmanuel had rejoiced when Zen had disappeared. The past 2 years were bliss for him, but he had never expected Zen to come back suddenly, as a virtual tribulation realm cultivator and with obvious improvements in all aspects. Emmanuel was beginning to wonder if he could still beat Zen. And his mind was throwing up nothing but doubts. It took him a while before the answer became crystal clear to him. Bang, 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 bang. Zen had thrown out 4 punches in quick succession, felling the 4 virtual tribulation realm warriors who'd been fighting with him. The warriors became powerless against Zen, falling to the ground, moaning, and finding it difficult to get back up again. Their ashen faces betrayed the degree to which they had become injured. Zen had still been a war general when he had become able to fight the top-level warlords in the Tower of Sin. Now that he had reached the virtual tribulation realm and had the strength of a warlord, it had become quite easy for him to deal with these warriors, who were at the primary or middle level of the virtual tribulation realm. However, these things that were normal for Zen were obviously abnormal for others. Everyone on the platform was stunned into silence. The scene in front of them made them feel that the person they were fighting wasn't a virtual tribulation realm cultivator but a life and death realm expert. Only a life and death realm expert could pulverize those warriors like Zen just had. Rocher smiled faintly as he remarked, "Looks like he's still the same Zen." He was always much stronger than others on the same level. When he had started out in martial arts, Zen had been able to fight against an illuminating soul realm warrior when he was still at the nature level. Once he stepped into the illuminating soul realm, he had become powerful enough to easily prevail over an internal elixir realm warrior. Usually, the higher one's cultivation base was, the harder it was to maintain an advantage over others of the same level. After all, every warrior who reached the virtual tribulation realm must be the best of all. This was exactly why Rocher, Patrick, and Morphins had been so worried about Zen. They now understood that Zen still maintained this massive advantage in his fighting abilities. Considering his previous performances, they knew that Zen was now powerful enough to fight a life and death realm expert. Exactly how strong was a life and death realm cultivator? Every cultivator at the life and death realm was the most powerful across the continent. Even Letitia was still trying to break into the life and death realm. Nobody had expected Zen to possess such terrifying strength, especially after he had disappeared for 2 whole years. Everybody was in awe of his astonishing improvement. Emmanuel's mind had figured out the answer to his earlier question and it was clear as day now. He now understood that Zen could absolutely crush him with his current strength. His heart sank, just like the other cultivators who had come with him. Zen turned to Emmanuel and said coldly, "Stop resisting and you'll be punished less. Or I might have to kill you without mercy." Many of the virtual tribulation realm cultivators were stunned. Zen's display of strength had planted seeds of fear in their hearts and was causing their minds to waver. "Even if you give up resisting, he won't let you off that easily." Emmanuel yelled to his warriors, refusing to give up. His words were like a shot of adrenaline to the warriors, who clutched their weapons with renewed vigor at his words. They were carrying out a conspiracy against the sect, and any crime of this sort was basically a capital offense. It was similar to a rebellion in the imperial palace. Anyone planning to subvert the country couldn't expect an atonement after their movement failed. Zen sneered at Emmanuel's words and took a step forward, and then another, as he headed straight for Emmanuel. He was the source of the chaos, and the event wouldn't end if he didn't die. What was happening now was completely different from before. Earlier, Rocher had chosen not to kill Emmanuel because even if they had killed him, they wouldn't have been able to change the situation. But now that Zen had control over the situation, as long as he killed Emmanuel, the ringleader of the conspiracy, everyone else would give up resisting. Emmanuel retreated at full speed as he saw Zen chasing after him. "You want to escape? There's no escape for you today." The light of water enveloped Cloud Hall. It was impossible for Emmanuel to escape from this enchanted barrier. He had only recently reached the late stage of the virtual tribulation realm and his strength was only equivalent to that of a warlord belonging to level 8 or 9. He was in no way a match for Zen. Emmanuel was overcome with regret as Zen chased him. He had thought that he'd never fail in his plans. But Zen's appearance had been unexpected and had thrown a spanner in the works. As a member of the Cloud Hall, Emmanuel was now clear about Zen's extraordinary talent. It wouldn't be long before Zen would climb to the top of the martial world, and when that day came, no one in the central region would be able to match him. Emmanuel was not God. He had never calculated or even dreamed that Zen would return at such a crucial moment. Zen, spare me, just this once. I will go into hiding and never enter central region again. Emmanuel begged for Zen's mercy as he dodged his attacks. I'm sorry, but that's not possible. I had already planned to kill you, but since you are an elder of the Cloud Hall, I thought it was improper for me to do that. But you forced yourself into this position and now, it's too late for you to beg for mercy, Zen said coldly as he traveled towards Emmanuel, the distance between them decreasing each time he jumped. If you kill me, my Zhou family will definitely become an enemy of the Cloud Hall. All the noble clans of Cloudy City will act against Cloud Hall. Emmanuel threatened. You think all the noble clans in the Cloudy City will follow your Zhou family? That's just a third-grade clan. In your dreams, perhaps. Zen retorted. He was now only 10 feet away from Emmanuel. Then go to perdition. Now that he knew he couldn't escape, Emmanuel suddenly turned around and pulled out a black spear from his space ring. He stabbed it at Zen as he yelled, "Sun-extinguishing spear." The moment he thrust the spear, the tip began to glow so brightly that it felt like it could take away the radiance of the sun and the moon. Being an elder of the Cloud Hall meant that Emmanuel was undoubtedly strong. But Zen didn't even budge at Emmanuel's full-blown attack. Instead, he sneered as he grabbed the tip of his spear with his bare hands. With just a push, Emmanuel's top-grade fairy weapon bent and began to crack into pieces, an ode to Zen's great strength. This was the last straw for Emmanuel, his heart sinking into a bottomless abyss. The difference in his and Zen's strengths was much greater than he had imagined. Chapter 695, Bragging. With his weapon broken by Zen, Emmanuel's eyes flashed pleadingly as he continued, Zen, I am an elder of Cloud Hall. Even I've committed a crime of rebellion, it shall be Letitia who will decide my fate. I surrender. You can't kill me. His words made Zen hesitate. Strictly speaking, what he said was true. Emmanuel was the backbone among the elders of the Cloud Hall, making his status and position both higher than those of Zen. In fact, Zen was merely a disciple of the Cloud Hall without any promotions. As long as Zen didn't kill him, Emmanuel understood that he could use the influence of the Zhou clan to have Letitia spare his life at the very least. As long as he didn't die right there, he would have a chance at a comeback sooner or later. Who knew what the future held? Many people in Cloud Hall were standing by the windows or at the corners of the buildings, watching the scene unfold in the air above Cloud Hall. In this rebellion, the majority of the Cloud Hall disciples had chosen to stay neutral. After all, it was a matter of internal strife among the senior leaders and had little to do with the common warriors of the Cloud Hall's lower ranks. Oh my goodness, Zen is back. He's chasing after Master Zhou with bare hands. This kid is a real freak. After disappearing for 2 years, he's back and he's fighting against Master Zhou. Are you guys blind? Master Zhou can barely strike. This isn't a fight, he's completely crushing him. Don't you understand? To most of the people within Cloud Hall, it didn't matter who took control of the place. At this moment, all they cared about was watching a good show. Some of the younger generation from the influential clans weren't in a good mood, particularly those from the Zhou clan. When they saw how Emmanuel was being pushed back relentlessly by Zen, their expressions grew grimmer. Their cultivation levels were too low, they weren't strong enough to participate in the fight. Standing in the elite house was Frank, who had been staring blankly at how Zen chased away his father and how he forced him to beg for mercy. Frank's face darkened as a rainstorm inside him loomed. As his heart grew heavy, he glared at Zen, his heart filled with complicated thoughts. Back in the Cloud Road test, he was nothing short of arrogant. Back then, he appeared as though nobody in the world would succeed except him. Among the disciples of the younger generation, who could measure up to him? Frank had never had to take Zen seriously. However, in only 2 years' time, Zen had grown into a figure that even his father would find difficult to deal with. Meanwhile, Frank was still stuck at the ultimate level of the illuminating soul realm, unable to match up to even Rocher or several others. How couldn't he be resentful? With Frank's heaven-level talent, his cultivation speed shouldn't have been so slow. It was just that at that time, Zen had crippled one of his hands in the Cloud Hall. His warrior spirit then had suffered a great blow. With both physical and mental trauma, Frank spent a long time down in spirits. At this moment, all Frank wanted to do was jump in front of his father and protect him, but another Zhou clan disciple pulled him back and gave him a disapproving shake of his head, signaling him not to act so rashly. Zen's strength had already surpassed anyone's imagination. If Frank stepped up, he would only bring shame to himself. In the air, Zen had a moment's thought, and any hesitation he had in his eyes disappeared in an instant. A murderous look replaced it. "You're right, I can't kill you, but I can kill you on behalf of Letitia." With that, Zen sneered and rushed toward Emmanuel once again. Because he knew Emmanuel was a cunning man who had attempted to kill him several times already, Zen understood that nursing a viper in his bosom wouldn't bring him any good. Moreover, this time, Emmanuel's goal was to kill off Letitia. If he were only after usurping the leader's position of Cloud Hall, Zen wouldn't have cared so much. With his current cultivation level, the Cloud Hall wasn't even that significant. But if Emmanuel wanted to kill Letitia, he would be courting death by Zen's hands. In this world, there weren't many women worthy of Zen's attention. Letitia was one of them. Anyone who dared hurt the woman he cared for dearly would instantly become his enemy. Back then, when Eddie took Yan away, Zen was no match for him. Yet, he didn't feel afraid of him. Emmanuel was far worse than Eddie in strength, after all. Seeing Zen charging toward him, Emmanuel's heart sank. With grief and indignation, he said, "Zen, you're too ruthless. Since you dared to put your hands on Letitia, you must be prepared to die." As he spoke, he already drew out his long sword. Seeing the weapon's radiance glinting off the surface, Emmanuel's expression was filled with despair. "Who is Letitia to you that you would go to such lengths to protect her? Whatever she can give you, I can offer too." Swoosh. Barely listening to Emmanuel's plea, Zen slashed his sword. The sword intent spread into a crescent shape heading straight to his enemy. With an ironic smile, he responded, "Sorry, I'm not interested." To block the sword intent, Emmanuel pulled out a spare spear from his space ring. Realizing that nothing he said would make Zen back down, he became hysterical and began shouting, "Zen, you're just Letitia's toy boy. The Cloud Hall is unfair. Letitia is unfair." Knowing that he wouldn't be escaping death, Emmanuel could only shout in despair and throw dirt at Zen and Letitia with his words. Hearing his insults, Zen was taken aback before he smiled maliciously. "I see, it looks like the rumors in Cloud Hall were started by you." When Zen had just entered Cloud Hall, he had received special attention from Letitia, sparking rumors among the disciples that Zen was her secret lover. The disciples regarded him as a pretty boy that Letitia had taken a fancy to. "Yes, it was me. Am I wrong? You're nothing but an adulterous couple." Brandishing his spear, he went straight at Zen. Zen effortlessly blocked Emmanuel's attack with the back of his hand. Easily, he landed 3 strikes in succession. His long sword was a high-grade sacred weapon, so how could Emmanuel's top-grade fairy weapon ever defend against its power? The weapon in Emmanuel's hands instantly shattered into pieces. "You're wrong," Zen said, shaking his head. Emmanuel simply threw away the broken spear and fished out another as he coldly returned, "You have the guts to do it, but you can't even admit it. Zen, you're not all that." Unable to match Zen in a one-on-one battle, Emmanuel's last resort was to distract him with petty insults. Perhaps he would find an opening to strike. But he underestimated Zen's state of mind. All Zen had to do was casually thrust his sword forward, using his "no move" technique in the strike. It was impossible for Emmanuel to see through the strike, let alone to block. The long sword hit his chest and pierced through his heart in an instant. "I am not Letitia's secret lover. You should get your facts right. Letitia is my woman." As Zen pulled out his sword, blood began spurting from Emmanuel's chest. His body looked like a kite that had lost its string, falling limp to the ground. A heart-wrenching scream came from below. "Father!" Watching the scene was Frank, wide-eyed and distraught. But Zen only glanced at Frank indifferently before flying towards the Ice Palace, leaving everyone in Cloud Hall stunned in shock. But the shock wasn't because Zen had killed Emmanuel. Instead, it was because of his last sentence: Letitia was his woman. They didn't know whether or not his words were true, but if he dared to say it in front of such a large audience, then perhaps it was true. Words failed to describe how they felt. Letitia was someone with a pristine reputation, not only in Cloud Hall, but in the entire central region. The woman was flawlessly beautiful and had incomparable talent and status to match. These things made her the perfect woman and a noble, superior leader in their hearts. How could she have suddenly become Zen's woman? It was unbelievable. Just then, Zen heard Lavender from behind him. "Hey, since when did Letitia become your woman?" With a slight smile, he answered, I was bragging. The ice palace was situated at the highest point of the cloud hall. Although many of the elders at the internal elixir realm hadn't left the place, they had already seen the outcome of the battle. Emmanuel was cleanly defeated by Zen. The elders who had been part of the rebelling force completely gave up resisting. The rebellious elders who were at the virtual tribulation realm were weaker than Emmanuel, so if they were to resist, they would be courting death just as Emmanuel did. All they could do was surrender obediently and wait for the Cloud Hall's punishment. Having the support of several big clans behind them, it was unlikely that they would be killed. Still, they couldn't escape punishment. Chapter 696, Small Heavenly Tribulation. Zen was not concerned about everything that was happening now. Both Patrick and Louis were healing their wounds at that moment, so Zen decided not to disturb them. So instead, he walked up to Morphans and asked, "How's she?" Morphans nodded at Zen and knew why he was worried. "She's fine," Morphans answered. "Don't lie to me. If she's okay, why would those guys dare to act so boldly?" Zen questioned, his face doubtful of the answer he just got. If Letitia was actually fine, Emmanuel wouldn't dare to do this no matter what his motivations were. Zen was afraid that something wrong must have happened to Letitia. It was only when he saw Zen's expression on his face that Morphans realized that Zen had misunderstood the situation. He quickly said, "She is experiencing a life and death tribulation, that's why these people were taking advantage of her." A life and death tribulation? Zen looked shocked as he asked, "What about Lady Yu?" Suddenly, at that moment, all Zen wanted to know was what Imogen was doing. Even though Letitia was trying to break into the life and death realm, Emmanuel wouldn't do anything bold or rebellious if Imogen was there, guarding the Cloud Hall. "She is out, seeking her own luck," Morphans replied lightly. Actually, Emmanuel had tried to talk Letitia out of her decision about breaking into the life and death realm at that moment. It would be difficult for Cloud Hall to deal with any possible threat or trouble if neither Letitia nor Imogen was there. However, Letitia insisted on making a breakthrough at such a critical moment. Heavenly Evil Sect was becoming stronger every day. If she was able to successfully enter the life and death realm, she might get herself a chance to fight against Eddie. However, Letitia never expected Emmanuel's rebellion. If Zen hadn't appeared at the right time, Emmanuel might have already, with his people, broken into the Ice Palace and threatened Letitia's safety. "I must go inside and check on her," Zen said, looking concerned and worried. Although he had never experienced the life and death tribulation before, he had been told that this experience was extremely dangerous and that the death rate was high. Those lesser warriors who rushed to get to the life and death tribulation had a high probability of dying there. "But Zen, Miss Ning has specifically ordered that no one could enter the Ice Palace at this moment," Morphans replied seriously. As a response, Zen simply looked at Morphans and then slowly shook his head. Without looking back, he walked straight towards the Ice Palace. Morphans was about to pull Zen back, but as he looked at Zen's disappearing figure, he began to hesitate. If Zen hadn't come to Letitia's rescue, Emmanuel must have already broken into the Ice Palace and put Letitia's life in danger. Zen had earned his right to come inside and check on Letitia. Dense icy mist had permeated every corner of the Ice Palace. Zen could barely see anything as he pushed open the doors leading to the inner part of the structure. He then used his magical eyes to see things that were not far away from him. Wearing some light clothes, Letitia was just sitting there cross-legged, with her whole body frozen inside an icy column. It had been 2 years since they last saw each other. Zen, with great affection, stared at Letitia. As he did so, he noticed that in the 2 years that they hadn't seen each other, Letitia hadn't changed at all, and her face was still perfect and beautiful. Zen circled around the icy column. At that time, Lavender came out of Zen's body quietly, glanced at Letitia and whispered, "She's at the last stage. If she passes it, the life and death tribulation will surely descend on her." Zen looked at Lavender and asked out of curiosity, "What exactly is this life and death tribulation? Is it really as horrifying as the rumors say?" "Actually, only you warriors from the central region call it the life and death tribulation. In the upper world, it's called small heavenly tribulation," Lavender explained. "Small heavenly tribulation?" Zen asked, now looking more confused. "That's right. After entering the life and death realm, warriors have to resist the small heavenly tribulation, because their martial arts refinement is against the nature. They try to break through the human limits and make their bodies into supreme beings, which is normally prohibited by the nature. Those warriors have to take their punishments before they can go further. The stronger you are, the heavier the punishments you will face. That's where small heavenly tribulation and big heavenly tribulation differ, Lavender said slowly. After entering the life and death realm, the life and death tribulation you meet every time is a small heavenly tribulation, is that right? Zen asked. Yes, Lavender replied, as she glanced at Letitia. With a deep breath, she shook her head and added, the small heavenly tribulation which will descend on Letitia's body will be horrifying, I'm afraid, said Lavender sadly. What do you mean by that? Zen asked nervously, his face starting to get pale. If somebody else was waiting for the small heavenly tribulation to descend on his or her body, Lavender would definitely mock his or her overconfidence and stupidity. However, Lavender knew Zen so well, and he was actually most concerned about Letitia. So, she didn't dare mock Letitia's zeal and determination in front of Zen. She thought for a moment and picked her words carefully. Letitia's cultivation method is largely based on restarting and practicing anew, which is greatly against the nature. If she succeeds in this, her strength and power will be much stronger than her peers at the same level. Zen nodded, the Sutra of Empyrean Goddess that she's cultivating truly is much stronger. Regular warriors usually find it nearly impossible to start with. It's more than what you just said, said Lavender, once again shaking her head. You know, there have only been a few warriors in the upper world who dared to restart their cultivation and practice anew mainly because it will bring a much more severe heavenly tribulation. Because of that, most warriors prefer other cultivation methods. Lavender's words confused Zen. Back then, the Cyan Dragon had found the unique nature of the Sutra of Empyrean Goddess. However, he chose to keep those facts from Zen. Zen then said to the Cyan Dragon, you didn't mention those things back then. The Cyan Dragon thought for a few moments and answered, I know how to offset the negative results of Letitia practicing anew 9 times. But, the Cyan Dragon stumbled over his words. She's already attempting the life and death realm. You saying this does not mean anything now, Lavender interrupted the Cyan Dragon, sneering. Young lady, I know what you're saying. But, I think Zen may be able to help Letitia. How can I do that? Zen said quickly. He wasn't understanding anything, but he would do whatever it took to help Letitia. Also, how come I don't know any of these things? Zen added. Both the Cyan Dragon and Lavender shut their mouths up. An awkward silence then sank in. Lavender sighed and said, although the small heavenly tribulation is horrifying, I believe in Letitia's strength. She isn't like those regular warriors and she may actually find a way to successfully resist the small heavenly tribulation. But if she fails, Lavender paused, looking directly at Zen. I'll tell you how to come to her rescue. Lavender's words and the Cyan Dragon's silence convinced Zen that he should have faith in Letitia. It wasn't the first time that Lavender and the Cyan Dragon behaved so strangely and cautiously. Zen had already gotten used to them and their behaviors. And with that, he decided to ask no more questions. Standing amidst the icy mist, Zen accompanied Letitia for a whole day. Letitia didn't move a bit, and no communication happened between the two of them. Then, suddenly, cracks appeared and started spreading on the enormous icy column. Within a few moments, the icy column broke and its fragments exploded in the whole room. After the icy column was completely obliterated, the sky outside the icy palace became bright, a dazzling light illuminating everything beneath. Then, deafening thunders were heard, and black clouds gathered overhead. So, is the small heavenly tribulation coming? Zen asked, looking outside. The emergence of the thunder surprised him greatly. Lavender nodded and replied, yes, this is one of the many anomalies before the small heavenly tribulation descends. If the small heavenly tribulation is so horrifying, what about the big one? Zen asked, as what was happening outside continued to intimidate and scare him. Lavender smiled and replied, a strong warrior can endure 9 small heavenly tribulations, each one more terrifying than the last one. After this, warriors who get into the Soul Sea realm have to confront the big heavenly tribulations. As for their power, Lavender also started looking out and whispered. It's unimaginable. The big heavenly tribulation was still far away from Zen, but the smaller one was approaching. As long as Zen continued to raise his cultivation and enter the top-level virtual tribulation realm, he would face the small heavenly tribulation soon. Boom! At that moment, a dragon-shaped bolt of lightning struck the roof of the ice palace. The ice palace had been built like a fortress, and its top floor was covered with thick ice spikes. However, the lightning, with its great force, was able to cause a large hole. Stones, ice cubes, and broken beams fell down. Luckily, those things didn't hurt Letitia at all. Her eyes stayed closed, and cold air was suddenly coming out of her body. It was only moments away until the small heavenly tribulation would fall on her body. With her full attention to the incoming ordeal, she wasn't able to notice the presence of Zen in the ice palace. Through the large hole in the ceiling, Zen cautiously stared at the dragons in the sky created by the lightning. With a deep breath he asked, "How can these dragons go through the enchanted barrier?" The enchanted barrier called Light of Water was set outside of the cloud hall. However, it seemed to be incapable of stopping the electric dragons from coming into the palace. Chapter 697, Undergoing the Heavenly Tribulation. The lightning dragons circled around in the air and then slowly descended from the sky as if they were real. They effused blood-curdling steam that engulfed the entire cloud hall. After the internal conflict that happened, all of the warriors within the cloud hall were terror-stricken. The imposing momentum that they were experiencing at that moment gave the impression that the entire world was in a state of chaos. Our leader's life and death crisis is coming. I wonder whether she can pull through. If she is able to break through to the life and death realm, it would be a celebration for our cloud hall. Those who had reached the life and death realm were the most powerful masters among all the warriors, as the life and death realm was the boundary between the strong masters and the ordinary warriors in the entire central region. There were many virtual tribulation realm warriors in the central region that guarded a handful of third-grade sects. However, there was almost no life and death realm warrior in sight. As long as a clan or sect was handled by a life and death realm master, it could definitely enter the ranks of the fourth-grade sects. But there were only a few fourth-grade sects in the central region, such as the Cloud Hall, the Bloodwood Cliff, and the mysterious Luna Hall. The Bloodwood Cliff had a life and death realm master back then, but he died while passing through the tribulation. Now, it became a struggle for the sect to cultivate a new life and death realm master. Life and death realm masters always had a great influence on their respective sects. Ultimately, the grade of a sect was to be measured based on its overall strength and background. The strong warriors of that particular sect were regarded as the most straightforward excellence. Raising his head, Zen looked at the white lightning dragons as they slowly flew down. He had a grave look on his face and so many thoughts ran through his head. Seeing as those dragons were quite terrifying, he wondered if Letitia stood a chance. While Zen was worried about the situation, Lavender was not bothered. After all, she was used to that kind of scene. Glancing at Zen's hardened face, she smiled. Don't worry about it too much. It is her decision to undergo the tribulation, so she must have prepared well for it. Zen just nodded in response and then allowed his gaze to fall back on Letitia. In the presence of the enormous dragons, Letitia's petite figure looked even smaller. When the lightning dragons were only 10 feet away from her head, Letitia suddenly stretched out her white hands, and a small jade card appeared in one of them. As she gently flipped her jade card, countless ice phoenixes shot out from it. Suddenly, the cold light started to increase in intensity, and then spiraled upwards. What a pure law power! A flash of light reflected on Zen's eyes as he followed the movement of the ice phoenixes. The ice phoenixes that Letitia produced contained the pure power of the ice law, however, Zen was unfamiliar with the ice law that was contained in the law power. It seemed that the ice law had two layers. When those ice phoenixes rose and swirled in the air, they collided against the lightning dragons. Crack! As the two types of laws banged into one another, rays of light so bright erupted. Another dazzling light appeared in the sky above the cloudy city which stretched about 30 miles away. Those who weren't in the area of the ongoing tribulation could only guess that a huge star had emerged from the sky. Only a very small number of warriors understood that this was the phenomenon caused by the Cloud Hall leader while she underwent the life and death crisis. They also knew that once Letitia succeeded, the situation in the cloudy city could be settled once and for all. It wasn't the Cloud Hall that was most affected by this internal strife within, but the cloudy city itself. The majority of the warriors in the Cloud Hall were neutral, but almost everyone who chose to rebel was from the various clans in the Cloud City. They knew Letitia's personality very well. At first glance, she seemed like a delicate little girl. She wasn't at all tall and looked like she always needed help, but in reality, she was exceptionally powerful and tough. Also, she might not really remove all of the aristocratic clans from the city. After all, these great clans had a special relationship with the Cloud Hall. If Letitia got rid of them all, it could greatly affect the Cloud Hall. As for the traitors, Letitia was sure to wipe them all out. There was no traitor's life she planned to spare, nor was she planning to show any mercy to any sect leader. It was because of the special connections between the Cloud Hall and these third-grade clans that some of them were unable to escape even if they wanted to. Furthermore, the central region was in turmoil now, and it was better for them to just obediently pay for their mistakes than put up a useless fight. At the very least, these clans could still be under the protection of the Cloud Hall. Crack! Violent explosions rang out one after the other. Hearing the loud sound, Zen still looked calm and his expression did not change at all. His entire focus was on Letitia. Those lightning dragons were very formidable, but as Lavender had said, Letitia had prepared well, and the cold light emitted by her small jade card had already managed to weaken the dragon's power. Every time a layer of cold light leaked out, it interweaved with one lightning dragon. The Ice Phoenix and the Lightning Dragon simultaneously released two different kinds of law power which melted into each other. There were just as many Ice Phoenixes as the Lightning Dragons. When a dragon descended, an Ice Phoenix quickly rose up to crash into it. Not once did a dragon successfully land on Letitia's body. They were all offset by the Ice Phoenixes. 5 minutes passed and the number of lightning dragons in the sky had drastically decreased. After several of the remaining lightning dragons were gone, Zen asked, "Is it over?" Shaking her head, Lavender said, "I'm not so sure about that. There are all kinds of heavenly tribulations with different power. Generally, the heavenly tribulations that they encounter vary for each warrior. Some even face more than one. However, there is one unbreakable rule. The stronger the warrior is, the stronger the heavenly tribulation he or she faces." Rumor had it that the heavenly tribulation was a punishment from the nature, but it was dismissed for absurdity. In truth, the heavenly tribulation was just one of the resisting methods of the nature. As long as the life and death realm masters appeared in the world, they could attract the attention of the nature, because the life and death realm was one of the boundaries of cultivation. After the warriors broke through and reached the life and death realm, and even the soul sea realm, they could have the capability to threaten the nature law. As for the heavenly tribulation, it came down as soon as the nature law sensed the threat and intended to eliminate the threat as early as possible. The nature law was very keen on threats and could sense one easily. Warriors who had extraordinary skills encountered equally extraordinary heavenly tribulations. For those warriors who were with average talents and didn't cause much threat, the tribulations sent down upon them were also less strong. In Lavender's opinion, even if the Sutra of Empyrean Goddess that Letitia cultivated was indeed compelling, it could cause a huge hindrance. Thus, the difficulty level of her heavenly tribulation was much greater than that of other warriors. That was one of the main reasons why there weren't many warriors in the upper world who chose to practice powerful cultivation methods like the Sutra of Empyrean Goddess. Surely enough, after Letitia had killed all those lightning dragons, a new surge of power and momentum began to spread throughout the sky. The dark clouds slowly changed color, turning from black to crimson red. It was as if an incomparably massive flame was rolling and burning within the clouds. Upon the appearance of that bright red cloud, a heat wave enveloped the vicinity. All of the warriors in the Cloud Hall felt it, and the heat wave caused a stir among them. They were all very alarmed. Will the descending flames burn the entire Cloud Hall? I don't think our leader should undergo the tribulation in the Cloud Hall. This heavenly tribulation is too powerful. I'm afraid that after she passes through it, the entire Cloud Hall will be destroyed. If she doesn't do it in the Cloud Hall, where else can she do such a thing? The warriors outside watched closely like tigers eyeing their prey. If Letitia was to be targeted by the warriors from the heavenly evil sect, then she could easily fail to break through the tribulation. Those little warriors could get so distracting. Everyone in the Cloud Hall activated their life vitality, forming a thin layer of it to block the heat coming from the sky. They all took precaution. The vigor of the fire cloud was immense and all of it was aimed at Letitia. The heat wave's effect on the Cloud Hall was only a segment of it. This time, Zen did not say anything. What Lavender said was right, and he had indeed underestimated Letitia. After all, he had left Letitia for 2 years, so how could Zen know what had happened to Letitia in the past 2 years? At that same time, the red cloud rolled downwards and dropped itself towards Letitia. The expression on Letitia's face remained unchanged. She slightly flipped her finger, which not only prompted the activation of her jade card, but engaged her life vitality. When she gently pointed her finger upwards, the entire ice palace began to shake. Chapter 698, The Nightmare Tribulation. The ice palace's continuous shaking caused all the ice pillars to collapse and shatter into thousands of palm-sized crystals. The crystals converged above Letitia's head and released a cold light. A small ice phoenix burst forth from the jade card and devoured this cold light, rapidly transforming itself into a huge, magnificent creature. Aru! The ice phoenix screeched before charging headfirst towards the rolling red clouds. Swish! The red clouds swirled with ominous-looking flames and made the entire cloud hall unbearably hot and sweltering. The moment the ice phoenix entered the clouds, it began to rapidly melt and evaporate. However, as it melted, the thousands of crystals that had come from the ice palace continuously replenished its cold energy and kept it in flight. As the ice phoenix roamed the fiery clouds, the scorching heat within Cloud Hall began to dissipate. Lavender smiled faintly. Her preparations were more thorough than I expected. The second wave of heavenly tribulation is more violent than the first one, but she is able to resolve it more efficiently. Zen couldn't help but agree. It seems that the life and death tribulation is less horrible than I've expected. I'm sure I'll be able to withstand them in the future, he said confidently. Lavender couldn't help but laugh. Don't be so sure. When it's your turn to undergo the small heavenly tribulation, its magnitude would probably be 10 times stronger than this. It was only a passing remark, but she couldn't help but notice the way Zen stared at her blankly. What, you don't believe me? Zen shook his head. I would never doubt you. Then why are you looking at me like that? She asked. Zen shrugged. I just didn't expect you to let out such a pretty smile. Lavender had always been expressionless. Ever since Zen had obtained her as his sword spirit, she had never so much as cracked a smile and always remained poker-faced. When she began to talk in the Tower of Sin, the aura she emanated was incredibly domineering. Anyone who stood in front of her would fall short of breath, while those with a weaker aura would be unable to even raise their heads. However, Zen had been a witness to her rare, flustered state. Back in the Heavenly Feather's sacred place, he had seen just how she and another demon Night Queen abused each other to the point that her ears turned crimson. Today, he saw her smile and felt a lot closer to this sword spirit of his. Lavender glared viciously at him. It was lucky that she was a sword spirit, or Zen would have noticed her blush. As they conversed, the sky changed its color once again. Lavender suddenly raised her head in shock. My goodness, she exclaimed. Impossible. The third wave is actually the nightmare tribulation. Lavender had remained calm and relaxed throughout Letitia's tribulations since the first two weren't necessarily that difficult in her eyes. However, her expression suddenly changed the moment she saw the third wave. What's nightmare tribulation? Zen asked with a frown. There are many kinds of heavenly tribulations, Lavender told him. Letitia's first wave was just an ordinary thunder dragon tribulation. It's very common and just a tad bit more difficult than the ordinary thunder tribulation. The second one was the fire cloud tribulation. It was more difficult than the first, but Letitia's ice system cultivation technique was able to effectively neutralize it. But the nightmare tribulation is a different story. Lavender's face fell as she continued. Just what kind of fate does Letitia have? How in the world did she end up attracting the nightmare tribulation? Her words made Zen anxious. What's so scary about it? I don't know about humans, but according to the Demon Knight statistics, the nightmare tribulation has only occurred around 1,000 times, she told him. It sounded like a fairly big number, but a martial artist had to undergo 3 to 8 tribulations once they stepped into the life and death realm. The upper world had no shortage of warriors at the life and death realm, and every year, the number of those who underwent tribulations was unfathomable. However, since the beginning of time, there were only 1,000 recorded instances of the nightmare tribulation. How many have survived the nightmare tribulation? Zen asked. Lavender looked at him with a grim expression. 1. Her reply made Zen gasp in surprise. She continued further, that warrior had reached the Soul Sea realm and encountered the nightmare tribulation during the big heavenly tribulation. His cultivation level was high, so the power of the tribulation was 100 times stronger than it is now. He survived and managed to become a supreme lord. Of the 1,000 nightmare tribulations, only one had been able to survive. The success rate was just too low. At that moment, dark green petals began to fall from the sky, floating and spiraling towards Letitia. Didn't you tell me that I have a way of breaking heavenly tribulations? Zen asked. Yes, Lavender confirmed. However, if Letitia can successfully pass the heavenly tribulations, then there would be no need to use that thing. Are you talking about the heavenly fragment? Zen asked. Lavender merely answered with a nod. How do I use it? He wanted to take the fragment out and use it right then and there, so he could help share Letitia's burden of taking on the heavenly tribulations. However, Lavender shook her head. Let's wait first. Heavenly tribulations are inevitable disasters for martial artists, but they are also cultivation methods. If Letitia can't withstand it, then you can help her. Is the heavenly fragment really used to block heavenly tribulations? He asked. It was a matter of utmost importance and he was determined to get to the bottom of it. Using the heavenly fragment to block heavenly tribulations is like using a razor to cut a cement block, Lavender said. Besides, the fragment you obtained isn't a fragment of the heaven today. The heaven today? What does that mean? He had never heard of such a concept. The current heaven is the sky right above us, Lavender told him calmly. Your fragment was left behind by the previous heaven. Zen was stunned by this new information. There are different heavens. Just then, the flower petals reached Letitia, and the conversation about the different heavens was immediately pushed to the back of his mind. Letitia's face was full of caution. She had felt the power of the life and death tribulation and knew that this one wasn't going to be as easy as the first two. Gently stretching her hands, she waited as the huge ice phoenix let out a huge screech and charged straight towards her. In the blink of an eye, Letitia and the ice phoenix became one as the latter melded and transformed itself into armor that covered her entire body. This was Letitia's complete form. She immediately flew to the sky and faced the petals head-on. The petals don't look scary at all, Zen murmured. He couldn't feel any sort of power from the petals, unlike the past two heavenly tribulations. They simply felt like ordinary flowers that filled the sky and floated down like gentle rain. Lavender, on the other hand, was quick to dispel his thoughts. Every petal is a nightmare. The reason why the nightmare tribulation is so difficult is that it's not aimed at a warrior's body but at his soul. The petals looked normal, and a gentle touch from Letitia was enough to have one shatter into a million pieces. However, each time a petal broke, it quickly turned into a nightmare that attacked Letitia's mind. A few dozen of them were all right, but pretty soon, Letitia had smashed through hundreds of them and was finally feeling the tribulation's effects. Her face had gotten extremely pale, and every time a petal touched her, her entire body trembled. Chapter 699, A Familiar Figure. The cultivation on the soul level was the hardest for martial artists. Zen was able to cultivate his body and cinnabar field while attending to the cultivation of the soul at the same time. However, only a few martial artists could cultivate on multiple aspects at the same time as Zen did. Compared to the ordinary warriors, Letitia's soul was stronger, but still far weaker than Zen's. If only dozens of nightmares attacked her soul, Letitia could withstand them without question. Now, there were thousands before her eyes. How was she going to manage? In just a matter of minutes, Letitia's face had turned as pale as paper. She also began to stagger sideways. Evidently, it became a struggle for her to resist. I think it's time to give her a hand. Seeing Letitia's current situation, Zen's concern grew bigger inside his heart. If a warrior's soul was hurt, it could possibly cause irreversible damage to the warrior. Just wait for a while, Lavender said, discouraging Zen from making any hasty actions. These nightmares may look like they're just here to attack her, but they also serve as a way to cultivate her. This could do her some good. Warriors had to go through a lot of hardships and tests so they could grow, and Lavender clearly understood when exactly to stop so the damage could be avoided. It was also known to Zen that Letitia must go through this process as well. As that saying went, too much caring and overthinking can confuse someone. Zen cared a little too much about Letitia and couldn't afford to see her get hurt. Just as the petals were about to crash into Letitia, she suddenly took out a bronze-colored pill and swallowed it. Her face immediately flushed after taking the pill. Before attempting to make it through the life and death realm, Letitia had repeatedly told herself that her attempt to make the breakthrough could only be successful. There was no room for failure. Now that the heavenly evil sect had risen from the east and had become the biggest threat, the entire central region had fallen into chaos. Moreover, Imogen was facing a life and death crisis. So, she had no other choice but to go overseas to look for opportunities. The search for her fortune could cause her death. Both Letitia and Imogen knew this. Before she left, Imogen had discussed important matters concerning the Cloud Hall with Letitia. Upon her departure, she let out a heavy sigh for her worries about herself and Zen. If only Zen was still here. Ever since Zen had disappeared from Mist's celestial tomb, Letitia had gone to the chaotic ocean of stars to search for him a few times, but to no avail. However, she firmly believed that Zen didn't die and that he would one day return. 2 years had passed very quickly, but Zen was still nowhere to be found. There was no information about him in the entire central region. It was as if he had completely vanished into thin air. Even if Letitia knew in her heart that Zen was out there somewhere, she couldn't help but worry. Now that Imogen had left the central region, Letitia had put all of her bets in one shot, trying to make it through to the life and death realm. In order to break through the life and death realm, Letitia had made exhaustive preparations. She had almost utilized all the resources in the Cloud Hall and even had to borrow the Jade token from the World Commercial Alliance at a great cost. Normally, the Jade token wasn't easily handed to anyone no matter how much he or she offered for it. Not even to someone like Letitia. That kind of Jade token could increase the chance of surviving the life and death crisis by 20%. Any cultivator at the late stage of the virtual tribulation realm was beguiled by it. Back when Imogen asked to borrow the token, she was solidly rejected by the World Commercial Alliance. However, as the heavenly evil scent rose like a comet, the World Commercial Alliance also became anxious. It was clear that only several sects from above the 4th grade in the central region could fight against the heavenly evil sect. The ones that had the biggest potential to defeat the heavenly evil sect were the Ethereal Spirit Sect, World Commercial Alliance, and the Cloud Hall. The competition between those three was undeniably fierce. But as they faced the same nemesis, they had no other choice but work as one in cooperation. One more life and death realm master was an additional chance for them to defeat Eddie. That was a principle even a child knew. How could the ancient tycoon of World Commercial Alliance not understand it? When she finally managed to obtain the Jade token, Letitia's confidence to break through the life and death realm grew bigger. The first and second waves of tribulation were dealt with ease by Letitia. She almost found it hard to believe how it went quite smoothly for her. Normally, after breaking through the life and death realm, the first life and death tribulation wasn't too difficult, and some life and death realm warriors even passed the life and death crisis after just one wave. As for Letitia, she had to face 2 brooding waves which were both far more difficult to pass than normal. She never thought there could be a 3rd wave after those menacing 2. The 3rd wave of life and death tribulation was an attack on her soul. Through the perspective of an outsider looking at her, it seemed that the flower petals colliding against her weren't as harmful, but to Letitia, it was pure agony. Every time a petal hit her body, a delusive nightmare appeared in her mind. It tarnished her soul, bringing about a gut-wrenching pain all over her body. This why is the 3rd wave of life and death tribulation so difficult to overcome? Letitia thought as she struggled. Confusion and pain were evident on her face. Regardless of the circumstance, her warrior spirit was not inferior to that of any male martial artist. Since she had chosen to break through to the life and death realm, there was no turning back. She had to accept all the trials that came with it and make it through. Unfortunately, the pain she was experiencing was not something any ordinary person could endure. Bit by bit, her soul was being destroyed. Physical pain, in time, could go away. In some conditions, it could numb a person to the point of passing out if it was already too extreme, which was one of the many ways one's body protected itself. It was a defense mechanism. On the contrary, the pain inflicted on one's soul was unavoidable. That kind of pain could come in with subtlety but had the complete ability to also cause so much unbearable suffering. In that certain moment of desperation, Letitia had swallowed a soul-boosting pill. It was refined from the brain of a shadow beast and could increase soul power by at least 1-fold over a period of time. That precious pill gave amazing effects to any warrior who swallowed it. As a treasure of the Cloud Hall, the soul-boosting pill had been kept in the Cloud Hall for hundreds of years. Now, it was Letitia who had the opportunity to take it for her sake. Ever since Letitia took over as the leader of the Cloud Hall, she was able to utilize a lot of its resources. When Zen was at the martial arts contest, Letitia had used the magical eye of the Angel of Death to block Eddie's punch. Sure, she made some selfish use of those resources, but Letitia brought even greater benefits into the Cloud Hall. It had become a 5th grade sect and through the help of Zen, it possessed an indestructible sect protecting array. Breaking through to the life and death realm meant that Letitia could also possibly lead the Cloud Hall to become a 6th grade sect someday and even turn it into the first sacred place in the central region. And so, she swallowed the whole soul-boosting pill without second thoughts. Just as the pill's magic was absorbed by all the fibers in her body, a strong medicinal power surged into her. In an instant, she felt her soul become much stronger, and her perception of her surroundings also became much sharper. However, Letitia didn't want to waste any of her soul power just to sense her surroundings. If she did so, she might have been able to find that Zen was already standing inside her ice palace. Slacking in the face of the life and death crisis was not on Letitia's list. Focusing all of her attention on fighting those petals, she had already forgotten about what was happening outside. After Letitia swallowed the soul-boosting pill, the corrosive effect of the flower petals on her became weaker. She was on the verge of collapsing earlier that time, but with the help of the pill, her eyes lit up, and she lived through the attack of the flower petals. During that certain moment, Letitia had already endured over 100 nightmare attacks. All of a sudden, the petals in front of her began to fall one by one, coming at her endlessly. She started to wonder whether or not she could really make it. The flush that once appeared on Letitia's face had been replaced by paleness in just a matter of 5 minutes. I'm still unable to surpass this, Letitia thought to herself. A trace of sadness was painted all over her face. She could already feel that the effects of the pill were starting to fade away while the petals continued to rain down on her in a consistent force and speed. Of course, Letitia didn't fully comprehend how difficult it was to overcome the nightmare tribulation. She could only blame her strength for not being able to move forward successfully. I'm not strong enough for this, she mentally scolded herself. As the nightmares continued to charge into her, Letitia gradually grew weaker. She felt as if her head was set in flames and could blow to smithereens at any given minute. Will I fail? Letitia thought once more, being really hard on herself at that point. Sadness rested on her face. She knew exactly what could happen if she failed. It wasn't the depletion of their lifespan that killed most life and death realm warriors in the central region, but the life and death crisis they went through. Death was just lurking around Letitia. Suddenly, Letitia began to fall into a state of trance. Her surroundings grew dimmer. Struggling to blink her eyes for clarity, Letitia was almost certain that a familiar figure was before her. Chapter 700. Letitia survived. Letitia slightly squinted her eyes. She felt a throbbing headache and her vision was blurry. This happened every time one's soul had been injured. It was as if one was drunk and prone to hallucinations. She could see Zen. He was special to her and she missed him like never before. She realized she was hallucinating. She felt weak and like she was on the verge of death. Letitia felt disappointed and regretted feeling so overconfident. She thought she could survive this life and death tribulation, but now it seemed that she wouldn't be able to do so. How could she be so stupid? She wished she could see Zen again. The illusion of him made her feel warm and gave her a bit of strength. After her being attacked by countless nightmares, illusions had formed in her mind. Those petals looked normal to others, but to her they were all strange beasts with various shapes and sizes. Zen was now in one of those nightmares. Zen's figure appeared and quickly approached her. Letitia extended her arms and hugged him. Letitia had always thought highly of herself. She occupied a high status, much higher than Zen's. After all, she was the master and owner of the Cloud Hall. However, even though she was at a higher level, she had always liked Zen since they were on the Cloud Road. Right now she couldn't even bear to think about it. It was just the illusion of Zen. It was not the real him. Zen was tall but not sturdy. With his training, he had grown 1 or 2 inches taller over the past 2 years, and surpassed Letitia by a full head. All she wanted was to embrace Zen. As she reached for the illusion of him, a tragic and miserable smile appeared on her face. She would think of Zen as death came to her. His image comforted her even though she felt like she had done nothing good. The illusion of Zen was better than no Zen at all. Zen saw that Letitia couldn't hold on any longer. As the fear of losing her came over him, he flew to her holding the heavenly fragment in his hand. As soon as he got to her, Letitia hugged him affectionately, leaving Zen awestruck. Zen held Letitia in his arms and activated the heavenly fragment using the method that Lavender taught him. She told him that this heavenly fragment was very special and had very unique features. It could absorb an enormous amount of life vitality. She also warned him against causing a large fluctuation. All he needed to do was apply enough life vitality for it to work. As Zen injected a bit of life vitality into the heavenly fragment, it started to absorb those petals as greedily as a giant whale. Lavender had also told Zen that the heavenly tribulation was induced by the nature and that it could be easily absorbed by the heavenly fragment. The two opposing heavenly forces mutually reinforced and neutralized each other. It worked almost immediately and much better than what Zen expected. The petals were gone in the blink of an eye. Luckily, there was no other threat falling down from the sky. The life and death tribulation was finally over. Letitia leaned on Zen's chest with her eyes closed. She looked pale and pained but with a faint smile on her face. From time to time she would shake her head as if disappointed. Zen landed on the ground of the ice palace and sat down cross-legged. He placed Letitia on his lap, quickly took out an emerald green pill and stuffed it into Letitia's mouth. He also took some soul-healing pills that would help Letitia recover. When he left the Sea God continent, Miguel and the others gave him pills and other potent drugs as presents. This was one of those pills from the Sea God continent, and you couldn't tell which level it belonged to by simply looking at it. It was said that this pill was made according to a prescription found inside the dark nether cave, and that it was more potent than any of the drugs made in the central region. When Zen stuffed the pill into Letitia's mouth, she frowned disapprovingly. She tried to spit out the pill, but Zen forced her to swallow it. Then, with some hesitation, he patted her stomach gently with the palm of his hand. These kinds of pills needed the help of life vitality to dissolve completely and take effect. Letitia, who was in a semi-coma, couldn't use her life vitality to dissolve the pill. Zen had no other option but to help her. So he rested his hand on Letitia's flat belly, touching her smooth and soft skin. Then, he released his life vitality. Letitia didn't resist. She was too weak to put up a fight, even though her power was strong enough to prevent Zen's life vitality from entering her body. As Zen poured his life vitality into Letitia's body, the pill began to dissolve and take effect. A faint fragrance was coming out of her body. Letitia rested her head on Zen's chest and fell asleep. Zen was worried that Letitia's soul had been damaged and couldn't recover. She seemed fine, though. He trusted that Lavender knew the right time she had chosen for him to rescue Letitia. As soon as Letitia fell asleep, 3 people barged into the Ice Palace. It was Morphins who was taking 2 elders of the Cloud Hall to investigate what happened inside the Ice Palace. The life and death tribulation had ended, and they desperately wanted to find out whether Letitia had survived or not. Letitia's safety would determine the Hall's fate. While Letitia was challenging the life and death tribulation, she gave an order out to forbid anyone from entering the Ice Palace. Morphins had tried to stop Zen from going inside. It was too dangerous. And he didn't want anything or anyone to distract Letitia. Now that the life and death tribulation had been over, they wanted to make sure Letitia was alive and well. They needed to see her safe. As Morphins and the 2 elders entered the room, they saw Letitia resting her head on Zen's chest and sleeping. They couldn't hide the shocked expressions on their faces. Now they realized that rumors going around about the love affair between Zen and Letitia might be real. Letitia's personal life and love affairs were none of their business. They were her subjects and weren't in the right position to give an order to Letitia, less so to tell her what was right or wrong. Before Morphins could open his mouth and say anything, Zen held up a finger to silence him. The 3 of them understood what Zen meant. They nodded their heads and exited the hall quietly. After what happened, Letitia had passed the life and death tribulation. She had ascended, and now she was a warrior of the life and death realm. Even though Letitia had only survived 1 life and death tribulation, her cultivation method was very special. When she was only in the early stage of virtual tribulation realm, she was almost as powerful as Morphins. Now, after entering the life and death realm, even though she was still at its lower level, Zen believed that she would be formidable. She could be a match to most of the life and death realm warriors. Letitia was sound asleep in his arms. Her soft body felt like it weighed nothing. She weighted less than a feather. As the first rays of dawn lit up the sky, Letitia's thick eyelashes trembled slightly, and her brows were once again locked in a deep frown. She woke up with the rising of a new day. Her mind, once foggy, had become clearer. She felt awake, and as she moved she felt there was someone next to her. She reached out and her fingers grasped someone's clothes. She was struck with confusion. Am I still alive? She thought to herself. She took a deep breath as if to make sure she could breathe. She opened her beautiful eyes abruptly, and that was when she saw Zen's handsome face. She felt a rush coming over her and her whole body trembled. Zen opened his eyes and saw her awake. He was sitting there and cultivating his martial arts. When he saw Letitia staring at him, he felt relieved. He smiled and said, "You're awake." Letitia pursed her lips. She still couldn't believe what she was seeing. She was afraid Zen was still an illusion, and that him sitting beside her was not real. She did not loathe illusions because at least illusions made her happy. She hoped that she could reach for him, even though it was just an illusion that she was staring at. Illusions lasted only for a moment, and she wouldn't want to make him disappear. "Say something," Zen said with a strange and worried expression on his face. Could it be that her soul had been damaged and her brain injured? Letitia looked up at the enormous hole overhead. The clouds above were drifting slowly, sending dazzling rays of light. The morning air was mixed with a wild and chaotic energy from both heaven and earth. It wasn't an illusion, it was Zen. He had come back to her. As she realized this, the corners of her mouth curled up. Her heart was filled with joy. She wanted to laugh loudly, but her eyes suddenly turned red and she started crying compulsively. Zen was confused. Why was she crying? She was alive. The life and death tribulation had ended and she survived it. She had grown even more powerful than before. Why was she crying? Is it possible that her brain was severely damaged? He thought worriedly. Now she was laughing and crying at the same time. What is wrong with her?